There is a photograph that Ronan Mercer keeps folded inside the lining of his left boot. Not in his wallet, not on his phone, in his boot, pressed against his heel with every step he takes, every mile he rides, every morning he wakes up and decides not to drink. The photograph is of a 7-year-old boy who is not Eli Brooks. The boy in that photograph has been dead for 26 years, and the reason he died is because someone exactly like Ronan Mercer drove away. This is the story of what happens when a broken man finally stops the bike. If this story hits something deep in your chest, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments. We've got people watching from all 50 states and counting, and stay until the very last word, because the ending of this one, you won't see coming. The ice machine outside Pruitt's Gas and Tire had been making a sound like a dying animal for the better part of 3 weeks. Clint Pruitt knew it. His 2 part-time employees knew it. Every trucker who pulled off Route 70 to top off a tank knew it. Nobody had called anyone about it. That was the kind of town Harlan Crossing was. A place where broken things stayed broken because fixing them required admitting they'd gone wrong in the first place. Ronan Mercer pulled his '09 Softail off the highway at 4:20 on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. The sky had turned the color of a cigarette burn. Not orange, not gray. Something worse, something that belonged to the in-between hours when the light couldn't commit. He killed the engine in the far end of the lot, away from the 2 pump islands, the way he always parked, back to a wall, eyes to the road. 31 years of that reflex. Some habits didn't care whether you were 19 and scared in a forward operating base or 47 and riding alone through the Tennessee hills. The body remembered what the mind tried to forget. He swung off the bike and stretched his left leg. The knee had been wrong since Kandahar, and it would be wrong until he died. He'd made peace with that, mostly. The gas station smelled like spilled diesel and the ghost of someone's fast food. A hand-lettered sign in the window offered fountain drinks for 99 cents and lottery tickets by the register. The kind of place where people stopped because they had to, not because they wanted to. Ronan went inside, bought a black coffee in a styrofoam cup that was too small and too thin to hold the heat, and came back out. He was halfway through that coffee when he saw the boy. The child was sitting on the concrete pad beside the ice machine, back against the cinder block wall, knees pulled to his chest. 7, maybe 8 years old. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't looking at a phone, wasn't reading, wasn't watching the cars. He was simply sitting with the absolute stillness of a creature that had learned stillness as a survival strategy. The kind of still that takes years to develop. The kind that doesn't belong on a child's body. Ronan didn't move toward him. He just noticed. The boy wore a gray t-shirt with a faded number 7 on the chest, the kind sold in multi-packs, and jeans that had been washed so many times the color was more memory than fact. No jacket, and the afternoon had already turned cold enough that Ronan's hands felt it through the styrofoam. His sneakers, low-top canvas, once white, had no laces, not broken laces, absent ones, as if they'd been removed and never returned. His hair was the color of old straw, cut badly, maybe with kitchen scissors. There was a bruise on his left forearm, partially hidden by the way he held his knees. Old enough to be yellowing at the edges, but new enough that it still held its shape, a handprint or something close to it. Ronan was a man who had learned to read the architecture of damage. 3 combat deployments, 2 years as a road captain for the Appalachian Iron Brotherhood, and 4 years after that running his own shop had given him a taxonomy of the different ways a human being could be reduced. He recognized this. He didn't approach. He walked to the concrete barrier at the edge of the lot, sat down on it with his coffee, and said nothing. He was perhaps 12 feet from the boy. He stared at the road the way he would if he were simply resting. The way a man rests when he doesn't need anything from you. 2 minutes passed. 3. A pickup truck pulled in and gassed up and pulled out. The ice machine groaned. The boy didn't look at him for a long time. Then, carefully, the way a stray animal tests the distance, the boy's eyes moved sideways, quick, back to the road. Then sideways again, longer this time. Ronan held his coffee in both hands and kept his eyes on the highway. He'd learned that too. You don't make eye contact first with something that has learned to be afraid of being noticed. Another minute. "That's your motorcycle?" the boy said. So quiet, Ronan almost missed it under the sound of the ice machine. Yeah. The boy looked at it. The Softail was black, no chrome vanity, road-worn bags, a small Iron Brotherhood patch on the left bag. Not the kind of decal that meant anything to a child, just the suggestion of something the bike belonged to. How fast does it go? Fast enough to be stupid, Ronan said, not fast enough to outrun dumb decisions. The boy processed this. His arms stayed locked around his knees. Ronan finished his coffee. Didn't move. You waiting on somebody? The boy asked. Nope. Then why are you sitting there? Knees need a break. He tapped his left leg. Old war injury. Doctor says I should stop riding. I keep not listening. Something in the boy's face changed. Not opening up exactly, more like a door that had been barricaded from the inside, shifting half an inch in its frame. My dad says doctors just want your money. Ronan said nothing to that. He looked at the highway for a while. Your dad around here? The boy's arms tightened around his knees. That was its own answer. It's getting cold, Ronan said, not to the boy specifically. Just observing it the way you note weather. The boy said nothing. He was shivering. Ronan could see it from 12 feet, the slight tremor in the thin cotton of that 7 jersey, the way the child's jaw was set too hard for a child's jaw to need to be set. Ronan set down his empty cup, unzipped his jacket halfway, and pulled it off. He set it on the concrete barrier beside him. Just set it there. Then he crossed his arms and kept looking at the road. There was a long pause. The boy stood up, walked over, and picked up the jacket. He didn't say anything. He sat back down by the ice machine, bundled the jacket around himself, and disappeared into it. The leather swallowed him whole. He looked like a child wearing someone's life as a costume. Ronan sat on the barrier in his flannel shirt and felt the cold and didn't mind it. 15 minutes passed. Maybe 20. The sky continued its transformation into something that was no longer afternoon. Ronan had nowhere particular to be. He'd closed the shop at 3 because Tuesday afternoons in late September were the kind of quiet that made the walls feel like they were listening. That was when the boy said it. He didn't look at Ronan when he said it. He was looking at the jacket's zipper pull, running his thumb across it like it was something to hold on to. His voice was so matter-of-fact it was almost gentle, the way a child describes something that has become so normal it has stopped registering as wrong. They make me sleep outside. The noise of the highway fell away. The ice machine fell away. The cold fell away. Ronan turned his head and looked at the boy for the first time directly. The boy didn't look back. He kept his eyes on the zipper. Ronan's throat tightened in a way he recognized. He recognized it because the last time he'd felt it was at a graveside in Murfreesboro 26 years ago, standing over a box that was too small, thinking about a night he'd had 1,000 chances to make different choices and hadn't made a single one of them. His brother Danny's name had never gotten easier to carry. He breathed. "What's your name?" he said. Quiet, level. The voice he used in the shop when someone brought in a car that had been running on lies for too long and didn't know how to tell it. Eli. Eli. He let that sit. "I'm Ronan." The boy glanced up, brief, then back down. "Where's your house, Eli?" The boy tipped his chin toward the back of the gas station, vaguely westward. "Down the road, the gray one with the black mailbox, but—" He stopped. "But what?" Eli pulled the jacket tighter. "Denny doesn't like it when I'm inside, says I take up space." He said it the way a child says the sky is blue. Observed fact, uncontested reality. "So I come here. The man inside lets me sit. Long as I don't bother the customers." Ronan kept his face still. It cost him something to do it. "How long?" he said. Eli looked at him for a long moment with those haunted blue eyes that were too old for the face around them, eyes that had already developed the particular flatness of a person who has filed too many things under the category of things that happen that I can't change. "Since we moved here." He thought about it. "In the spring sometime. Spring to September. In a Tennessee hill town where the nights already had teeth to them." Ronan looked away. He looked at his motorcycle because he needed something to anchor himself to before he said or did something that came from the rage building in his chest rather than from the careful, deliberate, better part of him that his wife Maeve had spent 15 years excavating from under all the rest. He breathed through his nose, out through his mouth. "Does your mom know?" he said. The boy's face shifted, a complicated motion, multiple things happening at once behind eyes that had learned to hide them. "She knows some stuff," he said carefully, "but she's—" He stopped again. Then, "She's real tired a lot." Ronan understood what that meant. He'd seen what sustained terror did to a person's capacity to see anything outside their own survival. "You hungry?" he said. Eli looked at him, suspicious now, the way a child learns to be suspicious of kindness because kindness from adults has come with conditions. "I'm not trying anything," Ronan said. "I'm asking because I'm hungry, and if you're hungry, I'll get 2 things instead of 1. That's all." The boy studied him with those old man eyes. Then he said, "They have those hot dogs in there, on the rollers." "Roller dogs it is." He got up, went inside, bought 2 hot dogs and a bottle of water and a chocolate milk because the child was undersized and probably hadn't had enough of anything in longer than Ronan wanted to calculate. He came back out and sat back on the barrier and held one of the hot dogs out. Eli crossed the distance between them, took it, went back to his wall. They ate. The hot dogs were adequate in the way that food purchased at a gas station is always adequate, enough to remind you that eating is possible even when everything else is not. Ronan watched the boy eat. He watched him eat the way someone eats when they are not sure when the next opportunity will arrive. Not gobbling. Eli was too self-contained for that. But with a focus, an efficiency, a quietness that meant the act of eating required full attention. Nothing casual about it. The chocolate milk went last. The boy held the carton in both hands when it was empty, the way a child holds something they're not ready to let go of yet. "Eli," Ronan said, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly, okay?" The boy looked at him. "The bruise on your arm, where'd it come from?" Eli's eyes went to his forearm. He rearranged the jacket sleeve to cover it. His jaw set. "Fell," he said. "Okay," Ronan said. He didn't push. He learned that too. From 2 years of a court-ordered anger management program that had, against his initial contempt, actually taught him something about the geometry of trust. You don't take a wall down by charging it. You sit beside it long enough that it forgets to be a wall. They sat in silence for a while. "You gonna tell somebody?" Eli said. Not accusing, just asking, braced for an answer either way. "I don't know yet," Ronan said, which was the honest answer. The honest answer was that he knew exactly what he was going to do, had known from the moment the child said they make me sleep outside, but he also knew that saying yes, I'm going to report this to a child who had survived by controlling information could close a door that he needed to stay open. "Denny'll be mad," Eli said, still matter of fact, still reciting observable reality. "Yeah," Ronan said, "I expect he will." He looked at the sky. The last of the September light had given up. "You should head back before it's dark," he said. Not because he wanted the child to go back to whatever was waiting in that gray house with the black mailbox. Because a frightened child disappearing from his usual patterns while a stranger on a motorcycle made phone calls was a chain of events that needed to unfold carefully, not rashly, not with the particular flavor of fury that was building in Ronan's chest like exhaust in a sealed garage. Eli stood up. He started to shrug off the leather jacket. "Keep it tonight," Ronan said. "I'll be back tomorrow." Eli looked at him. "You don't live around here." "Knoxville. About 40 minutes. That's far to come back." "Not really." The boy held the jacket around himself and looked at Ronan with those ravaged eyes. "Why would you come back?" And Ronan, who had 100 answers, all of them true, all of them inadequate, said the simplest one. "Because you matter, Eli." The boy stood very still for a moment. Then he turned and walked toward the road, a small figure wearing a dead man's jacket. Because that was what it was, in a way. The jacket of the man Ronan Mercer used to be before the war, and the years and the grief had worn him down to something quieter and more careful. That child walking away in that leather was something that hit Ronan in the sternum and stayed there. He watched until Eli turned west down the road and disappeared. Then Ronan Mercer sat alone in the parking lot of Pruitt's Gas and Tire and dialed a number he knew by memory. Maeve picked up on the second ring. He could hear their kitchen in the background, the particular quiet of early evening, the sound of something on the stove. "Hey," she said. "I need you to listen to me," he said, "and I need you to not say anything until I'm done." A pause. Maeve had been married to him for 15 years. She knew every register of his voice. "Okay," she said, simply. He told her. He told her about the ice machine and the still child and the 5 words that had opened something in him like a blade. He told her about the bruise shaped like a hand. He told her about a boy named Eli who slept outside. When he finished, there was a silence that wasn't empty. Maeve's silences never were. "Come home first," she said. "Then we figure out the right way to do this." "Maeve," "Ronan," her voice was steady. "Come home. We're not going to burn this down the wrong way." He closed his eyes. He thought about Danny. He thought about a box that was too small. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." He started the Softail and pulled back onto Route 70 and rode toward Knoxville in the dark. The engine's vibration traveling up through his palms and his arms and into his chest where it mixed with something he hadn't felt in a long time and didn't yet have a name for. The hills rose around him, black against a sky that was now fully night, and somewhere in them was a gray house with a black mailbox and a child wearing his jacket. And Ronan Mercer rode hard because if he stopped moving, he was going to turn around and do something that wouldn't help Eli Brooks at all. He rode hard. He breathed. He counted the mile markers the way he'd once counted heartbeats in a ditch outside of Kandahar. He made it home. Maeve had the coffee made. She was like that. Not in a servile way, not in a performing comfort way. In the way of a woman who understood that her husband sometimes came home with things in his chest that needed hot liquid in a quiet room before they could become words. She was sitting at the kitchen table with her own cup, her reading glasses pushed up on her head, a legal pad in front of her, because Maeve Patterson Mercer had been a paralegal for 11 years, and her first response to problems that required systems was to create a system. Ronan sat across from her. He wrapped both hands around the mug. His hands were mechanic's hands, permanently stained at the knuckles, scarred across the left palm where a piece of shrapnel had removed a 2-inch piece of skin in 2003, and the Army had replaced it with something that was technically skin but had never felt like his own. "Tell me everything again," Maeve said. Slowly this time. He told her. She wrote. When he finished, she looked at what she'd written. "The bruise is the thing," she said. "Sleeping outside is neglect. The bruise is physical abuse. Those are different categories in how CPS responds to them." "I know." "You need to call the hotline tonight, not tomorrow. Tonight." "I know." She looked at him across the table. Maeve had brown eyes that missed very little, and she was looking at him now with the expression she used when she was reading not what he was saying, but what was happening underneath it. "Tell me about the other thing," she said. "What other thing?" "Ronan?" He set down the mug. He looked at the table. "He's about the same age Danny was." The kitchen held that. "Yeah," Maeve said quietly. "And I drove away from a gas station the same way I drove away from—" He stopped. He breathed. "I didn't drive away. I came back." "You came back," she confirmed. She didn't reach for his hand, which he appreciated. Maeve understood that sometimes the thing that felt like comfort was actually interference. "You need to be careful that this doesn't become about Danny," she said. Not unkindly. Directly, which was how she said things that mattered. "It's not about Danny. Some of it is, and that's human, Ronan, but the part of it that's about Eli has to be clean. Eli needs someone who sees him, not a ghost." He looked at his wife. He thought, not for the first time, that he did not deserve her. He also thought that thinking he didn't deserve her was precisely the kind of self-flagellating nonsense she'd spent years trying to knock out of him. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said, and pushed the legal pad toward him. "Now, call Ork." The Knoxville CPS hotline connected him to a woman named Cheryl, whose voice had the particular flat exhaustion of someone who had been absorbing the weight of other people's catastrophes for years and had made a professional decision to keep doing it anyway. Ronan respected that. He told her what he'd seen clearly, in order, without editorializing. The child's name, the approximate location of the house, the bruise, the sleeping outside, the approximate duration, Cheryl typed, asked clarifying questions, typed more. A caseworker will conduct an initial assessment within 48 hours, she said. 48 hours. He's sleeping outside right now, Ronan said, carefully. Sir, I understand that it's 40 degrees tonight. I hear your concern. For cases that don't meet the immediate danger threshold for emergency response, our standard protocol, okay, Ronan said, because he'd learned something in those anger management sessions, learned it bone deep, which was that arguing with systems from a position of rage never moved those systems. It just gave them a reason to categorize you as the problem. Thank you for making the report, Cheryl said. You'll receive a case number by email if you provided your address. He had. He thanked her. He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. 48 hours, Maeve said. She'd heard. Standard protocol. She wrote something on the legal pad. He didn't ask what. He went to the garage because the garage was where he went when the inside of his head needed to be drowned out by something physical. The shop had 3 bays and a motorcycle lift and enough tools to occupy a man's hands through most categories of inner crisis. He pulled the Softail in, changed the back tire he'd been meaning to change for 2 weeks, and worked until midnight with a focus that had nothing to do with the tire and everything to do with keeping the machinery of his hands moving so the machinery of his mind didn't get traction. When he came inside, Maeve was asleep. He showered in the dark so as not to wake her, lay down beside her, and stared at the ceiling. He thought about a 7-year-old boy in an oversized leather jacket, about blue eyes that had already learned to stop expecting, about a house a half-mile off Route 70 with a black mailbox and 40-degree nights, and a man inside named Denny who said children took up space. He thought about Danny. He made himself stop thinking about Danny. At 3 a.m, he got up and went to the kitchen and wrote down everything he could remember about the exterior of that gas station, the orientation of the road, the direction the boy had walked. He drew a rough map. He wrote down Eli's age estimate, the description of the bruise, the specific wording the child had used. They make me sleep outside. The precision of that they. The stepfather and the mother, both implicated. Or the stepfather and the mother too afraid to be anything but complicit, which was its own kind of implication. He put the notes in a folder. Maeve's legal pad went in beside them. Then he sat in the dark kitchen and thought about what 48 hours meant for a child sleeping outside in late September in the Tennessee hills. He thought about the temperature forecast. He thought about the way Eli had held the chocolate milk carton when it was empty. He thought about Knox Hadley. Knox was the president of the Appalachian Iron Brotherhood's Knoxville chapter and had been for 6 years. And before that, he'd been road captain, and before that, he'd done 2 years in county on a charge that had been a bad situation handled badly by a 23-year-old who hadn't yet learned to be anything but reactive. Knox was 52 now. He had 3 daughters and an ex-wife he remained on terms with that could only be described as respectful, and a German shepherd named Walter. He had a Purple Heart from Fallujah that he kept in a shoebox under his bed and did not discuss. Ronan hadn't called Knox yet. He was thinking about whether to, not because he doubted Knox's intentions. Knox Hadley was a man whose fundamental orientation toward the world was protective, the way some men's was analytical and some was appetitive. No, the hesitation was because he knew what calling Knox would set in motion, and he needed to be absolutely certain that what he was setting in motion was disciplined and careful, and not even in its most justifiable version, a group of men on motorcycles going to a house in the dark to make a man who hurt children understand consequences. That was not the move. That was never going to be the move. If the system failed, when the system showed its particular slowness, its particular preference for protocol over flesh and blood urgency, there were other moves. Public, dignified, documented moves. The kind of moves that forced systems to respond because the alternative was embarrassment. But that was later. Right now, the move was documentation, paper trails, phone numbers, the language of bureaucratic accountability. He thought about this until gray light started to show at the kitchen window. Then he put on his jacket and rode back to Harlan Crossing. Pruitt's Gas and Tire opened at 6. The lot was empty except for an idling semi at the far pump. The ice machine was still making its dying animal noise. Ronan parked and sat on the barrier and drank coffee from the gas station and waited. At 7:20, the boy appeared around the corner of the building. He was still wearing the leather jacket. He was also wearing, Ronan noticed, the same clothes as yesterday, and his eyes had the particular quality of someone who has not slept well, or possibly at all. He stopped when he saw Ronan. Then, slowly, he crossed the lot and sat down beside the ice machine in his usual spot. "You came back," Eli said. "Told you I would." The boy considered this. "Denny came out looking for me last night. He paused. He was loud. Something moved through Ronan's chest. He kept his face neutral. "You okay?" "Yeah." Eli pulled the jacket tighter. "I hid behind the feed store. He didn't find me." A 7-year-old child hiding behind a feed store in 40-degree darkness while a man shouted his name. Ronan breathed. He breathed deliberately. "Eli," he said, "I want to be honest with you about something." The boy looked at him. "I made a call last night to the people whose job it is to help kids who are in situations like yours. I didn't use your name, which was not technically true but close enough to a partial truth to prevent panic. But I gave them enough information that they're going to send someone to check on things." Eli's face went very still, that terrifying stillness again. "Is Denny going to find out it was you?" he said. "Denny doesn't know me," Ronan said, "and even if he did, that's my problem, not yours. He'll take it out on my mom." The clarity of that statement. The practiced, exhausted clarity of a child who had learned to map the topography of a violent man's likely responses. "I know," Ronan said, because lying wasn't something he was willing to do. "I know that's a real thing that can happen. And I'm not going to tell you it's not. But I will tell you this. The people I called, their job is to look at everything. Not just you. Your mom, too." Eli pulled at a thread on the jacket sleeve. He didn't say anything. "She's scared of him," the boy said finally. "She wasn't always. Before." He stopped. "Before what?" "Before he started drinking like that." A pause. "Before he broke her hand that time." The words landed in the morning air and stayed there. Ronan held them. He held them the way you hold something hot, carefully, without setting it down, because setting it down wrong could cause a fire. "How long ago was the hand?" he said. Steady, level, the shop voice. "February," Eli said. "She told the hospital she fell. Denny drove her there himself." Another thread pulled from the jacket. "I heard him in the truck practicing what she'd say." February to September. 7 months of documented and undocumented damage in a house on a road off Route 70. A terrified woman who arrived at the hospital rehearsed. A child who recorded it all in perfect detail, because when you are 7 years old and living inside a disaster, detail is the only control you have left. "Eli," Ronan said, "can I ask you something else?" The boy nodded. "Is there anybody else? Grandparents, aunts, uncles? Anyone your mom would trust?" Something crossed the boy's face. Complicated. "Grandma Rose," he said. "Mom's mom. She lives in Cookville. But Denny—" He stopped, started again, started. "Denny said if Mom called her, He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Ronan nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Eli. I hear you." He bought the boy breakfast from the gas station. Eli ate a packaged muffin and orange juice with that same careful, total focus. Ronan watched him and thought about Cookville and a grandmother named Rose who probably did not know the shape of what her daughter and grandson were living inside. When the boy had eaten, Ronan said, "I'm going to come back tomorrow, and the day after that, until the people I called come out to the house. And after that, I'm going to keep an eye on what happens, okay?" "Why?" Eli said. "Because that's what I'm going to do." Eli looked at him for a long time. Then he said quietly, "Are you like a guardian angel or something?" Ronan nearly laughed. Not from amusement, from the specific, painful irony of it, a man who had spent most of his life being the opposite of that, being asked the question by a child who genuinely needed one. No, he said. I'm just a mechanic who knows something about broken things. He rode home through the morning hills. The air smelled like wood smoke and coming cold. The leaves on the ridgelines had started to turn, not dramatically, not yet, but at the edges, the way things start turning before you know they're gone. The next 48 hours moved the way bureaucratic time always moves, which is to say, like something that is theoretically in motion but appears, from the outside, to be entirely still. Ronan called the hotline again at the 24-hour mark to confirm the case had been assigned. It had. He received a case number and the name of an assigned caseworker, Bethany Oaks, District 4, Harlan Crossing area. He tried to reach Bethany Oaks and reached her voicemail. He left a message. He called again 4 hours later and reached her voicemail again. He left another message, more detailed this time, including the information about the broken hand in February, the grandmother in Cookville, the specific statement the child had made about sleeping outside since spring. Bethany Oaks called him back on the second day. She had a voice like someone who had been swimming upstream for a long time and was very good at it and had stopped expecting the current to change. "Mr. Mercer, I want to be transparent with you," she said. "We currently have 43 open cases in this district. I was assigned this one yesterday afternoon. I am scheduled to do the initial home visit Thursday." Thursday? This was Tuesday. "He's sleeping outside," Ronan said. "The temperatures tonight are going to be in the upper 30s. I understand your concern. The child told me that the stepfather broke the mother's hand in February. She told the hospital it was a fall. The stepfather coached her story." A pause. He could hear her breathing, the sound of papers. "That's significant information," she said. "I'll note it in the file. If you have documentation, I have written notes. I can email them." "That would be helpful." She gave him the email. "Mr. Mercer, I want you to know that I take this seriously. I also need you to understand that I have constraints on what I can do before an initial assessment." "I know," he said. "I'm not calling to pressure you. I'm calling to give you every piece of information I have so that when you walk in that door Thursday, you're not walking in blind." Another pause. "I appreciate that," she said, and she sounded for the first time like she meant it rather than like she was saying a thing that was part of a process. He sent her the notes. All of them. Every detail. The date. The time. The physical description of the child. The clothing. The bruise and its location and its color and its approximate age. The statement about sleeping outside since spring. The statement about the February injury. The statement about the grandmother in Cookville and the threat that had apparently been made to prevent contact with her. Maeve read it before he sent it and added 2 sentences at the end, precise and legal in their construction, that reframed the document as a formal report rather than a neighbor's impressions. She'd been doing that, quietly, consistently, in the background of everything, building a paper architecture around Ronan's gut instincts and turning them into something that a system would have to take seriously. He told Knox on Tuesday night, called him from the garage while Maeve was inside. He told him carefully, not as a call to action, explicitly as the opposite. "I need you to know what's happening," Ronan said. "I'm not asking for anything. I'm not bringing the chapter into this. I'm telling you because if this goes sideways, if the system drops this, I'm going to need to know the Brotherhood is aware and available. For legal presence. For witness. Not for anything else." Knox had listened without interrupting, which meant Knox was taking it seriously. Knox's default was to fill space with his voice. Silence from Knox Hadley meant calculation. "You know Tommy Bridger?" Knox said finally. Tommy Bridger was an attorney. He'd done a short run in the chapter in his late 20s before deciding that his particular skill set was better deployed as a civilian. He still rode, he still showed up at runs. He'd represented Brotherhood members in legal matters for 15 years, always at a discount, always quietly. "Yeah," Ronan said. "Call Tommy, before Thursday." "Why?" "Because if the caseworker shows up and what's in that house is what you think is in that house, you want to know what the legal options are before the system decides what they are. You want to be ahead of it." Ronan thought about that. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." "And Ronan." Knox's voice shifted into something lower. You're doing this right. I know that's not easy for you." Ronan didn't answer that. He thanked Knox and hung up and sat in the garage with his hands on his knees and thought about patience, about the cost of it, about the specific anguish of doing the right thing the right way when the right thing the wrong way was sitting right there, like a door you already know how to open. He thought about Danny. He thought about Eli walking toward a gray house in 40-degree darkness, wearing a dead man's jacket. He thought, patience. He called Tommy Bridger. Thursday came the way Thursdays come in the Tennessee hills in early October, being cold and overcast and smelling of rain that hadn't decided whether to fall yet. Ronan was back at Pruitt's by 7. Eli came around the corner at 7:15, and something was different about him. The stillness was there, but underneath it was something brittle, something that had been pressed too hard recently. "He found the jacket," Eli said. He sat down. He wasn't wearing it. "Last night." A pause. "He took it." Ronan looked at the boy, at a new bruise at the corner of his jaw, half hidden by the angle of his head. "Eli," Ronan said. "I'm fine." The voice of someone who has said "I'm fine" so many times it has become a reflex entirely disconnected from its meaning. "Does it hurt?" "Not bad," Ronan breathed. He breathed through everything that rose in him. The old rage, the particular helpless fury of a man who knew exactly what needed to happen and had to trust a system that moved on its own schedule to make it happen. He breathed until what was left was not the rage but the steadiness underneath it. "The woman from CPS," he said. "She's coming today." Eli went still. "To the house?" "To the house." The boy's face was unreadable. He looked at his shoes. His laces were still gone. "What if he—" He stopped. "What if he what, Eli?" Eli looked up. His eyes were dry, but there was something in them that was holding a weight that no child's eyes should be holding. "What if he talks to her and she just leaves? That's what happened in the last place we lived. Man came. Denny talked to him. He left. And then that night was—" He stopped again. He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Ronan leaned forward. He rested his elbows on his knees and looked at this child directly, eye to eye, because what he was about to say needed to be said straight. "I'm going to tell you something," Ronan said, "and I need you to hear it and hold on to it. Can you do that?" Eli nodded. "What happened in the last place? That was a failure, a system failure. Real ones happen. I'm not going to sit here and tell you this time is definitely different, but I can tell you this. I wrote down everything you told me, every word, and I gave it to her. And she knows what happened in February with your mom's hand. And she knows about the sleeping outside. She's walking into that house knowing all of it. That's different from a man showing up cold." The boy absorbed this. "And Eli," Ronan said, "whatever happens today, I'm not done. You understand? Whether it goes right today or wrong today, I'm not done." Eli looked at him for a long time with those old man eyes. "Why do you care?" he said. Not challenging, genuinely asking. The pure, direct question of a child who has learned that investment from adults comes with a hidden accounting. And Ronan Mercer, who had been carrying the answer to that question for 26 years in a pocket so deep he'd sometimes convinced himself it wasn't there, said, "Because I had a little brother once, and I didn't do enough, and he died, and I've been driving away from that for 30 years. He paused. "And I'm not doing it again." The cold morning air settled around them. Somewhere down Route 70, a semi shifted gears and its engine dropped an octave as it climbed a grade. The ice machine muttered. Eli Brooks looked at Ronan Mercer for a long time. Then he did something that Ronan hadn't seen him do once in the 4 days he'd known him. He cried. Not dramatically, not loudly, just a quiet, sustained dissolution of something he'd been holding for a very long time, his face crumpling at the edges while he kept his back straight and his hands in his lap, crying the way someone cries when they've forgotten crying was something they were allowed to do. Ronan didn't move toward him. He didn't speak. He sat on that concrete barrier in the cold October morning and let the boy cry and watched the road and kept his hands still and waited. Because waiting was what the situation required, and because somewhere across Harlan Crossing, a caseworker named Bethany Oakes was pulling into the driveway of a gray house with a black mailbox. and Ronan had no way to know what she was going to find there. No way to know what she was going to do about it. No way to know whether this was the day the system worked or the day it failed the same way it had failed Danny Brooks 2 decades and 600 miles ago. No, not Danny Brooks. Danny Mercer. His brother. The one whose name he'd never said out loud to Eli. The one he'd been protecting, or trying to protect, or trying to become worthy of the ghost of, since a September afternoon outside a gas station when a child with no shoelaces said 5 words and opened a wound that had never once, in 30 years, stopped bleeding. The boy cried. Ronan waited. And 45 miles south, without either of them knowing it yet, Bethany Oaks knocked on the door of the gray house with the black mailbox, and a man named Denny opened it with the specific, prepared smile of someone who has done this before and knows exactly how to make it in quickly, and smiled. And in that smile was everything that was going to force Ronan Mercer to make a call he'd been trying not to make. A call to Knox Hadley. A call that would not be about information this time, would not be about awareness, would be about something else entirely. Something that was coming for Denny before Denny knew it was coming. The ice machine groaned. The boy breathed. And Ronan sat very still. Bethany Oaks called at 11:17 in the morning. Ronan was in the parking lot of a Waffle House 6 miles from Harlan Crossing, sitting in his truck because the temperature had dropped, and he'd driven Eli back to the edge of the road that led to the gray house at 8:30 and hadn't been able to make himself go back to Knoxville. He'd ordered coffee he hadn't drunk, and a plate of eggs he'd moved around with a fork. The waitress had stopped asking if everything was all right after the second time. He picked up before the second ring. "Mr. Mercer." Bethany Oaks's voice had something different in it. Not the upstream swimmers' exhaustion of their Tuesday call. Something tighter, more careful. "I completed the initial assessment this morning." "And?" A pause that lasted 2 seconds too long. "I spoke with the child's mother, Sandra Brooks, and her husband, Dennis Holt. Dennis Holt was cooperative. Sandra Brooks confirmed that the child is enrolled in school, that he has regular meals, and that the family is under stress but functioning." Ronan said nothing. "I asked about the sleeping arrangements. Mr. Holt stated that Eli sometimes chooses to sleep on the back porch in warm weather because he, quote, likes being outside. Sandra confirmed this." "It's October," Ronan said. "Yes." "She's saying her 7-year-old chooses to sleep outside." "Mr. Mercer, the child told me himself. He used those exact words. They make me sleep outside. The word they. Not..." He stopped, controlled himself. "Did you see Eli?" "Eli was at school during my visit." School. Of course. Denny Holt had sent the boy to school on the one morning that mattered. Whether that was calculation or coincidence, the effect was the same. Bethany Oaks had walked into a house where every narrative was controlled by the man who ran it, with no child present to contradict him. "The bruise on his jaw," Ronan said. "Did you see?" "I did not have contact with the child." He put his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose and pressed until the pain of it was something he could focus on. "What about February? The hand?" "I asked about it. Mrs. Brooks confirmed she sustained a fracture from a fall. The hospital record supports that account." Of course it did. Denny had driven her there himself. "Mrs. Oaks," Ronan said, "I understand your following process. I'm not angry at you." He wasn't. Not at her. What happens now? "The case remains open. I'll schedule a follow-up visit within 30 days that will include contact with the child. If there's 30 days. Standard protocol for cases not meeting the immediate removal threshold." "What is the threshold? What does he have to do before the threshold is met?" Silence. Bethany Oaks breathed. When she spoke again, her voice was flatter than before. The flatness of someone reading from a rulebook they didn't write and sometimes disagreed with. "Documented evidence of imminent danger to the child's life or health." Ronan looked out the truck windshield at the Waffle House parking lot. A mother was loading 2 small children into a minivan. Normal. Everything normal everywhere except in a gray house with a black mailbox where a man had just successfully managed a caseworker and would go home tonight knowing he'd done it and take that knowledge out on whoever was most available. "Thank you for calling me," Ronan said. He hung up. He sat for 3 minutes in the silence of his truck. Then he started the engine, pulled out of the Waffle House lot, and drove back toward Harlan Crossing. He didn't know what he was going to do when he got there. He knew only that he could not make himself drive in the other direction. He parked on the road opposite the gas station and watched the gray house from 400 yards. He'd found the angle that morning, a pull-off behind a stand of cedars where the truck was not visible from the road, but the house's front and side were in clean sight line. He told himself this was reconnaissance. He told himself it was documentation. He told himself a lot of things that all pointed in the same direction. At 2:15 in the afternoon, a school bus stopped at the end of the road. A small figure climbed off and stood at the road's edge until the bus moved on. Eli Brooks, in his laceless sneakers, backpack over one shoulder, standing in the cold gray afternoon with the careful stillness of a creature that always checks its environment before it moves. The boy looked toward the house for a long time. Then he turned and walked the other way, toward the gas station. Ronan gave it 10 minutes. Then he pulled out and drove around and parked at Pruitt's. Eli was in his spot beside the ice machine. He dropped the backpack. He was sitting with his knees to his chest and his eyes on the road, and he had the look of someone who had been running a particular calculation for several hours and had not yet arrived at a satisfying result. Ronan sat down on the barrier. "She came," Eli said. Not a question. "Yeah." "He sent me to school." "Yeah." Eli's jaw tightened. The bruise on it had darkened overnight. Deep purple now at the center, fading to green-yellow at the edges. A full day further along than it had looked this morning. He'd been hit harder than Ronan had initially estimated. "She believe him?" Eli said. Ronan looked at the road. "She's keeping the case open," he said. "She's going to come back. She's going to talk to you next time." When's next time? He could not tell this child 30 days. He could not form that phrase and aim it at Eli Brooks's face. "I'm working on making it sooner," he said. Eli absorbed this. He was quiet for a moment, then, "He was in a good mood when I got home for lunch. That means he thinks it's over." The casual expertise of it, the complete terrible fluency of a child who had learned to read a man's moods the way other children learn to read weather, as a survival necessity, as the difference between a tolerable day and an intolerable one. "You eat lunch?" Ronan said. "He made a sandwich." "He made you lunch." "When he's in a good mood, he does stuff like that." A flat pause. "It doesn't last." Ronan sat on the barrier and felt something tighten in his chest that had been tightening since Tuesday and was now reaching a point where tightening was becoming structural, becoming part of the shape of him, a new architecture of fury held in controlled form by the thinnest membrane of deliberate patience. "Eli," he said, "I'm going to ask you to do something hard." The boy waited. "I need you to tell me every specific thing you can remember, not just what's happened to you, what's happened to your mom, dates, if you know them, what you saw, what you heard. I'm going to write it all down and I'm going to give it to somebody who knows how to use it." Eli was quiet for a moment. "Like a lawyer?" "Yeah, like a lawyer." Another silence. The boy looked at his shoes. Then he looked up, and the expression on his face was one that Ronan would carry for the rest of his life. The expression of a child who has been presented with the terrible adult proposition of being asked to be brave in a situation that should never have required bravery from a child at all. "Okay," Eli said. He talked for 45 minutes. Ronan wrote everything in the small spiral notebook he'd started carrying in his jacket pocket. He wrote without reacting. No wincing, no audible breathing, no emotional response that might cause the boy to self-censor out of protectiveness. He wrote the way a man transcribes something that has to be gotten down exactly right because it will matter later. It mattered. God, it mattered. The incident in May when Denny had put Sandra's head through the kitchen drywall. The time in July when Eli had come home to find his mother locked in the bathroom for 6 hours, and Denny sitting in the kitchen drinking, and Eli had made himself a peanut butter sandwich, and eaten it standing at the kitchen sink because sitting down felt dangerous. The night 2 weeks ago when Denny had come outside where Eli was sleeping in the backyard because Eli had forgotten to bring the trash cans in and had woken the boy by grabbing his arm, which accounted for the handprint bruise that Ronan had seen on his first day. The morning of the jawbone, 3 days ago, when Eli had answered a question Denny hadn't liked the tone of. He wrote it all down. He wrote it in Eli's exact words because a child's exact words, unmediated, carry a weight that paraphrase cannot replicate. When they were done, the boy sat quietly for a moment, the way someone sits after a thing that took effort. Not exhausted, exactly. Lighter. The particular lightness of a person who has been carrying something alone and has finally found somewhere to put part of it. "You going to be okay tonight?" Ronan said. "I'll stay out late," Eli said. "He sleeps earlier when he's been drinking." "Where do you sleep? Outside where?" "There's a space between the fence and the back of the shed," Eli said. "It's blocked from the wind. I got my sleeping bag in there. It's good enough." Good enough. 40 degrees and a sleeping bag in the space between a fence and a shed. "You got a phone?" Ronan said. "No." He thought about this. "There's a payphone at the gas station," he said. "You know how to use a payphone?" "No." Of course he didn't. He was 7. Ronan went inside the gas station and bought a prepaid phone. The cheapest one they had, $20 on the rack near the register, and a $10 prepaid card. He activated it in the parking lot. He put his number in it and Maeve's number and wrote both on a piece of paper and folded it inside the case. He went back and handed it to Eli. "You press the green button to call," he said. "You press my name and then the green button. You call me if anything happens tonight, anything, middle of the night, whatever." Eli held the phone. He turned it over in his hands. He looked at it the way the boy had looked at the chocolate milk carton, as though it were a thing whose existence had not previously registered as something he was allowed to have. "He'll take it if he finds it," Eli said. "Then you carry it on your body, in your underwear, if you have to. Don't let him see it." The boy looked at him. Then he put the phone in the front pocket of his jeans and pulled his shirt over it. "Ronan," he said. "Yeah." "Thanks." Just that. Ronan nodded once and looked at the road. He drove home in the dark and sat in his truck in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside because he needed to be someone Maeve could talk to, not the version of himself he'd been all day. He breathed. He looked at the notebook on the passenger seat. He thought about Eli and the space between the fence and the shed and a sleeping bag that was good enough. He went inside and called Tommy Bridger. Tommy Bridger had an office above a tax preparation place on Magnolia Street in Knoxville that smelled like old paper and fresh coffee, and the particular mustiness of a building that had been a lot of other buildings before it became what it was now. He was 51, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of face that was handsome in a battered way, a nose that had been broken and not set quite right, a scar through the left eyebrow from a bar fight in 1993 that he was not proud of and did not discuss. He'd been with the Brotherhood for 3 years in his late 20s before his brother-in-law had convinced him he was smart enough for law school, and he'd gone, convinced it would be temporary, and found that he was very good at something he hadn't expected to be good at. He still rode. He rode a 2014 Road King that was cleaner than anything in the Brotherhood garage. He showed up to runs on Saturdays when his caseload allowed. He donated his time at the rate of 2 pro bono cases a year, specifically to Brotherhood members and their families, and never counted the hours. Ronan had known him for 12 years. He trusted him in the specific way you trust a man who has never once told you what you wanted to hear. He arrived at Tommy's office at 7:30 on Thursday evening. Tommy was behind his desk eating a takeout container of soup and reading something on his computer. He waved Ronan at the chair across the desk without looking up. Ronan sat. He put the notebook on the desk. "How bad?" Tommy said, still reading. "Bad enough." Tommy closed the laptop. He picked up the notebook and read while he finished his soup. He read slowly, going back twice to sections. His face did not move while he read. Tommy's courtroom face. When he was done, he set the notebook down and looked at Ronan. "The February injury," he said. "Hospital name?" "Harlan Crossing General." "Records are public in a CPS proceeding if the case escalates. I can subpoena them." He tapped the notebook. The child's account. You transcribed this from direct testimony? Verbatim. Same day. Dated? Today's date on every page. Tommy nodded. This is usable. Not as legal testimony. Eli would need to provide that himself in camera with a guardian ad litem, but as supporting documentation to compel an expedited assessment. He paused. The 30-day follow-up is standard. I can file a motion to compel emergency reassessment based on new evidence, specifically the February incident and the child's physical evidence, the jaw bruise, the arm bruise. You documented those? I have written descriptions. I don't have photographs. Tommy looked at him. Can you get photographs? He's 7 years old. I know what he is, Ronan. Can you get a photograph of the bruising before it heals, with the child's consent and ideally with a parent or guardian present to consent on his behalf? Ronan thought about Sandra Brooks, locked in a bathroom for 6 hours, who had driven to the hospital with a broken hand and recited a story her husband had written for her. The parent situation is complicated, he said. Then we work with what we have. Tommy leaned back in his chair. The Old Springs protested. Here's where you are. Legally, you are a concerned third party with no standing in the child's life. What you have is a documented record that, presented correctly, can be used to push District 4 CPS toward an expedited assessment. That might get you 2 weeks instead of 30 days. He paused. It might not. And if it doesn't? Tommy looked at him steadily. Then you document more. You build the record. You wait for the next incident, and you make sure when it happens, someone other than you and the child can verify it. Wait for the next incident, Ronan said. I know how that sounds. Do you? Tommy held his gaze. Yeah, he said quietly. I do. He leaned forward. Ronan, look at me. He waited until Ronan was looking at him directly. I need you to tell me you're not going to go to that house. I'm not going to the house. I need it to be more than a sentence. Ronan breathed. He breathed with his whole chest the way the counselor at the VA had taught him. The breath that wasn't about oxygen, but about buying the prefrontal cortex time to assert itself over the part of the brain that ran on older, simpler programming. I know what going to that house looks like, Ronan said. I know what it does to the case. I know what it does to Eli's situation. I know that a man on record as the one who made the report showing up at the stepfather's door turns Denny Holt into a victim and me into a threat. I know all of this. Tommy watched him. I'm not going to the house, Ronan said. I'm going to do this right. I'm going to do it right because doing it right is the only thing that helps Eli. A long pause. Okay, Tommy said. Then let's talk about what right looks like. See, Maeve was awake when he got home at 10. She was at the kitchen table with her laptop and 3 separate legal pads. She'd been building something, Ronan realized. She'd been building it since Tuesday without telling him the full scope of it. Sit down, she said. He sat. She turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a spreadsheet, columns for date, incident, source, corroborating information, documentation type, status. Every conversation he'd had with Eli, every phone call with Bethany Oakes, every detail from the notebook, entered and cross-referenced in Maeve's precise paralegal hand. I also found the grandmother, Maeve said, Rose Audette, Cookville. She's on Facebook. She hasn't posted in 3 weeks, but before that she was posting daily. Then she stopped. Ronan looked at his wife. 3 weeks ago, Maeve said, which would be right around when Eli said the last bad incident happened. Yeah? They looked at each other across the table. You think Denny reached her, Ronan said, or Sandra did, at Denny's instruction, to cut the line. Maeve closed the laptop. Rose Audette used to be a teacher, elementary school, 31 years in Putnam County before she retired. She has a listed address. I didn't call her. I thought, she paused. I thought you should decide whether we call her. Ronan sat with that. A woman in Cookville who had stopped posting on Facebook 3 weeks ago. A grandmother who probably lay awake at night and stared at a ceiling and tried not to calculate what the silence from her daughter meant. A woman who might, if contacted carefully and correctly, become the most important ally they had. I'll call her tomorrow, he said. In the morning, before I go to Harlan Crossing. Maeve nodded. Ronan, she said. She said it the way she said it when what followed mattered. Yeah. Knox called while you were at Tommy's. He waited. He said 3 of the brothers saw you parked on the road off Route 70 this afternoon, in the Cedar pull-off. Ronan was quiet. He said they weren't following you. He said they were... Maeve exhaled. He said they were keeping an eye. I didn't ask for that. I know. I told him specifically, I know what you told him. Maeve's voice was level, but there was something underneath it. He's worried about you, the way the Brotherhood worries about each other, which is, they show up, whether you want them to or not. That's not what this needs right now. Then call him and tell him that, she paused. But Ronan, think about why he sent people. He knew why. Knox Hadley had known him for 16 years. Knox had seen him at his worst. The years before Maeve, when his relationship with restraint was theoretical at best. When the Brotherhood had been as much ballast as family, because without it, he'd have been just a man with a motorcycle and a capacity for damage, and no one to aim it at. Knox knew the geography of what Ronan was capable of. He wasn't going to do anything. But Knox's red wasn't wrong in principle. It was just wrong in application, because Ronan was not 29 anymore, and he'd learned, slowly and at significant cost, the difference between rage and action. He called Knox. Gatulskasem. Knox picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been awake. I heard you've been babysitting me, Ronan said. I heard you've been sitting in a cedar grove staring at a man's house, Knox said, documenting. From 400 yards. Is there a better distance? A pause. Knox breathed into the phone. He had a heavy voice, low and deliberate, the kind of voice that had learned to slow itself down. How bad is it? He said. Ronan told him. Not everything. Not the emotional architecture of it. Not Danny. Not the specific gravity of what it felt like to watch a child cry at 7 in the morning because someone had finally said you matter. But the facts. The February hand, the bruises, the 30-day timeline, the caseworker who'd been managed. Knox listened without interrupting. Denny Holt, Knox said when Ronan was done. Yeah. That name mean anything to you? No? Should it? Another pause. Longer. Maybe not. Hadley's working on it. Ronan's jaw tightened. Knox. I'm not sending anyone to the house, Ronan. Calm down. Then what are you... I'm running a name through the people I know, Knox said. The way people run names. Because sometimes when a man is comfortable enough to manage a caseworker, it's because he's managed other things before. In other places. A pause. You want me to stop? Ronan thought about that. No, he said. All right, Knox breathed. The guys on Route 70 this afternoon, that was Petey and Cobb. They weren't watching you. They were watching the house. I noticed. You didn't call. I'm calling now. Ronan, Knox's voice dropped another register. You're doing this right. I know you know that. I also know what it costs to do it right when doing it wrong is right there. A beat. I've got 12 guys in this chapter who've been where you're sitting. Different situations. Same feeling. That feeling where you know exactly what the man in that house deserves, and you know exactly how to deliver it, and the only thing in your way is everything you've learned about why that's not the play. Ronan said nothing. It's not just you, Knox said. That's what I'm telling you. Every man in this chapter is already invested. Not because you asked, because that's what we do. I'm not going to lose control of this, Ronan said. I know you're not. I'm not worried about you. I'm telling you that you don't have to carry this alone. Ronan sat at his kitchen table in the late-night quiet of his house and looked at his scarred left hand flat on the wood. He thought about what alone had looked like before. The long, bad years before the Brotherhood, before Maeve, before the specific slow work of becoming someone who dealt in patience rather than consequence. Okay, he said. Okay, Knox said. Now get some sleep. You sound like 40 miles of bad road. He slept for 4 hours. The phone didn't ring. He called Rose Audette at 8 in the morning. She answered on the third ring with the cautious voice of a woman who had learned recently to be cautious of phone numbers she didn't recognize. "Ms. Audette," he said, "my name is Ronan Mercer. I don't know you. I need you to hear me out before you decide whether to hang up." A pause. "Go ahead," she said. He told her enough. He didn't tell her everything. Not the February hand, not the jaw bruise, not the specifics of what Eli had said about the space between the fence and the shed. He told her a man in Harlan Crossing had been talking to her grandson for a week, that the child was not okay, that the child needed more people in his corner than currently existed in his life. Rose Audette was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice had changed. The caution was gone. What replaced it was not surprise. "He threatened me," she said. "Dennis Holt, 6 weeks ago. Sandra called me, and I could hear it in how she talked that she wasn't alone. And then he got on the phone and he said," she stopped, steadied herself. "He said if I tried to contact Sandra again, he'd make sure she told the police I'd been abusing Eli. He'd make sure there were enough people to back it up. He said I'd never see either of them again." Ronan held the phone against his ear and let that land. "You believed him," he said. "I didn't know what to believe. I called CPS myself after that. They said there was no open case." She paused. "There was no open case then?" "There is now," Ronan said. "A week old. Caseworker did an initial visit and Denny managed it." She made a sound. Not a word. Something below words. "Miss Audette," Ronan said, "I need to ask you something directly. Do you have any documentation of the threat he made? Anything at all? Text, voicemail, anything from Sandra before he got on the phone?" "I have the voicemail," she said. "Sandra's part and then his." Ronan breathed. "Don't delete it," he said. "Don't play it for anyone. I'm going to connect you with an attorney who's going to tell you exactly what to do with it." He was at the gas station by noon. Eli wasn't there. He waited 40 minutes. He went in and asked Clint Pruitt's part-time employee, a teenager named Marcus who wore noise-canceling headphones around his neck and rarely made eye contact, whether he'd seen the boy. Marcus glanced up. "Didn't come in today." Ronan felt it, the particular cold that has nothing to do with temperature. He went back outside. He sat on the barrier and watched the road and thought about Denny Holt in a good mood making a sandwich and what Denny Holt not in a good mood looked like, and whether yesterday, after the caseworker left and Denny had felt invincible, had been a good mood day or something else. He sat for another 20 minutes. Then the prepaid phone he'd given Eli buzzed. Not a call, a text. 3 words typed with the labored exactness of someone who was new to texting and was concentrating hard on each letter. "Can't come today." He called back immediately. It rang 8 times and died. He sat very still for 1 moment. Then he called Bethany Oakes. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Mr. Mercer, I need you to move the follow-up visit," he said. "Not 30 days. Now. Today if possible. Tomorrow at the latest." "Mr. Mercer," I explained, "the child didn't come to the gas station today. He's been there every day for a week. He didn't come. He sent a text that said he can't come. He's not answering his phone." His voice was controlled. He was proud of how controlled it was. "I need someone to lay eyes on that child today." A silence. "I can't do an unscheduled visit without Bethany." He said her first name deliberately, not to be familiar, but to make her hear him as a person rather than a case number. "I have a voicemail of Dennis Holt threatening the child's maternal grandmother. I have a documented account of a February domestic violence incident that was deliberately concealed from the hospital. I have a child's verbatim account of sustained abuse over a 7-month period. I have an attorney who is prepared to file for emergency reassessment this afternoon if you tell me you can't move on this." He paused. "I don't want to do it that way. I want to give you the chance to do it first, but I need an answer right now." The silence this time was different, longer. He could hear her breathing. "I have another home visit at 2, she said. "I can be in Harlan Crossing by 4. "Thank you," he said. He hung up. He called Tommy. He told Tommy about the voicemail and the grandmother, and that Bethany Oakes was going back to the house at 4. "I'll file the motion anyway," Tommy said. "Today, as backup. If she finds what you think she might find at 4 o'clock, Having the motion already filed moves everything faster. Do it, Ronan said. He sat on the barrier outside Pruitt's gas and tire, with the wind coming down off the ridge, and the ice machine making its sound, and waited for 4 o'clock the way a man waits for something he is not sure is going to arrive in the form he's hoping for. At 2:47, the prepaid phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call. He answered before the first ring finished. Eli? He said. Silence for a moment. Then breathing. Then, he knows. Something went cold in Ronan's chest. What does he know? About you. A whisper. The child was whispering, which meant someone was nearby, or could become nearby. Marcus at the store. He told Denny about the motorcycle man. A breath. Denny went to the store this morning. He found out your name. Ronan stayed very still. Where are you right now? He said. Back porch. Is Denny in the house? He went out in his truck. A pause. 20 minutes ago, he was drunk. He was mad. Another pause, and in the space of it, Ronan could hear the particular quality of a child's silence that contains fear held in suspension. He said he was going to find you. Ronan looked at the road, the empty road, the stretch of Route 70 in both directions, a drunk man in a truck who'd just learned the name of the person who'd reported him, a man who'd managed a caseworker with a smile and threatened a grandmother with a voicemail, a man who knew exactly how much he could do before a system moved against him and had been calibrating to that line for months. Eli, Ronan said, listen to me. I need you to do something right now. Can you hear me? Yeah. I need you to go to school right now. Walk to school and go inside and tell the person at the front desk that you need to call someone. Tell them you feel unsafe at home. Use those exact words. I feel unsafe at home. Can you do that? School's... A breath. School's closed at noon today. Teacher meetings. Of course it was. Okay, Ronan said. He was already standing, already walking toward his truck. Okay, Eli, go back to the space between the fence and the shed. Take your sleeping bag. Stay there until I call you back. Don't go into the house. If you hear his truck, don't move. Don't make sound. Stay in that space. Okay, the boy said. Small, steady. The steadiness of a child who has been preparing for this. I'm going to call someone, Ronan said. Someone's going to come to the house at 4 and they're going to make sure you're safe. I need you to hold on until 4. Can you do that? Yeah, Eli said. You're doing great, Ronan said. You hear me? You're doing everything right. He hung up. He got in his truck. He called Knox Hadley. I need a presence, Ronan said. Legal, public, at the gas station on Route 70 and Harlan Crossing. The man in the gray house with the black mailbox just found out my name and got in his truck drunk. I need eyes on the road, and I need it now. Knox said nothing for 2 seconds. How many? Enough that he sees us if he comes down Route 70, not enough that it looks like a threat. Witnesses, Knox, that's all. Give me 20 minutes. He parked at Pruitt's. He sat in the truck with the windows down so he could hear the road. He checked the phone. He watched the bend in Route 70 that led from the direction of the gray house. 17 minutes later, he heard them. Not loud, not sudden, just present. The sound arriving the way weather arrives in the hills, building from below the horizon, multiple engines in loose formation, not racing, not aggressive, rolling in at the speed of something deliberate, something that had decided to be there and was there. 4 motorcycles, then 6, then, from the other direction, 2 more. 8 brothers total, spreading out across the lot and the road shoulder in front of Pruitt's with the casual, unhurried confidence of men who had nowhere else to be and had decided that here was where they wanted to be. Petey Burrows killed his engine and walked over to Ronan's truck. Petey was 63 years old, built like a retired linebacker, and had a face that looked like it had been used as a map of somewhere hard. He'd done 2 tours in Vietnam that he'd never spoken about to anyone, except, apparently, a VA counselor whose name he'd never shared. He rested his forearms on the truck's window frame. Knox says you need witnesses, he said. That's what I need, Ronan said. We can do witnesses. Petey looked up the road. This the house? Down a ways, half-mile. He know we're here? He will if he comes down Route 70. Petey nodded. He went back to his bike and sat on it the way men sit on motorcycles when they're not going anywhere. The easy, proprietary lean of something that belongs to them as much as they belong to it. The other brothers settled in similar configurations. Nobody was loud, nobody was demonstrative. They looked like 8 men who had coincidentally stopped at the same gas station. They looked like nothing in particular if you didn't know what you were looking at. If you knew what you were looking at, they looked exactly like what they were. Men who had decided something mattered and had shown up. At 3:20, Denny Holt's truck came around the bend. It came slowly. Not erratically, not swerving, which meant Denny had the particular animal wariness of a man who'd been drunk often enough to know how to drive through it. He came around the bend and his eyes went to the gas station, and he saw 8 motorcycles and 7 men in leather waiting in the afternoon cold with the unhurried ease of people who had all the time in the world. The truck slowed. It didn't stop. It rolled past at maybe 15 miles an hour. Ronan watched from the truck. He watched a heavy-set man in a canvas work jacket with dark hair going gray look at the assembled Brotherhood with an expression that shifted through several things in rapid succession. Surprise, calculation, the specific micro-flinch of a man encountering a situation he hadn't expected and wasn't sure how to manage. The truck rolled past. It kept going. It went another half-mile and turned onto a side road and disappeared. Ronan let out a breath. Petey walked back to the truck. That him? Yeah. Man's got good instincts, Petey said. For what not to do. He's not stupid, Ronan said. He's going to regroup. How long you think he stays on that side road? Ronan looked at the time. 3:26. 34 minutes until Bethany Oaks was due. Not long enough, he said. And at that exact moment, the prepaid phone buzzed. Not a call. A text. He looked at it. It was not from Eli's number. It was from a number he didn't recognize. Harlan Crossing area code. And the text was 5 words. Stay away from my family. And before Ronan could process what that meant, before he could calculate whether it was Denny texting from a second number or Sandra or something else entirely, the phone buzzed again. Same number. 2 more words. I know. And then a third message. This one, not words. This one, a photograph. Taken from the angle of it, from somewhere outside. From somewhere low, looking through a cedar stand toward a road. The photograph was of Ronan's truck, parked in the cedar pull-off on Route 70, with a timestamp of yesterday afternoon, which meant Denny Holt had been watching him watch the house, which meant the dynamic Ronan had been operating under, documenting, building a record, staying visible but not aggressive, was not the dynamic that had actually been in play. What had been in play from the other direction was Denny Holt running his own investigation, building his own record, taking his own photographs. And somewhere in a gray house with a black mailbox, a child was in a space between a fence and a shed holding a prepaid phone, and a man with a work jacket and gray hair and all the patience of someone who had done this before had just let Ronan know, without ambiguity, without bluster, that he knew exactly what Ronan was doing. And was not afraid of it. Ronan looked at Petey. Petey had read enough of his face to read the shape of what had just happened. Problem? Petey said. Ronan looked at the road where Denny's truck had disappeared. Yeah, he said. And then the prepaid phone rang. Not the second number. Eli's number. He answered it before it could ring twice, but it was not Eli's voice on the line. It was a woman's voice. Frightened and flat and rehearsed, the voice of someone saying something they've been told to say. He wants me to tell you, Sandra Brooks said, that if you come near this family again, he has documentation that you've been stalking us. He has a lawyer. He says he'll have you arrested. Her voice cracked once on the word arrested, and then she controlled it. But in that crack was everything. The woman she had been before the fear had compressed her, the mother who lay awake knowing what her child was sleeping in and couldn't find a way through the wall of consequence that surrounded every possible exit. Sandra, Ronan said. She didn't hang up. That was the thing. She did not hang up. Sandra, you still there? Breathing. Careful, monitored breathing. The breathing of a woman who knows someone is nearby. Yeah, she said, nearly inaudible. "There's a caseworker coming to your house at 4 o'clock," Ronan said. "Her name is Bethany Oakes. She's coming regardless of anything Denny does between now and then." Silence. "I need you to let her in," Ronan said. "That's all. Whatever he tells you to say, whatever he's rehearsed, you don't have to say it. You just have to let her in and let her see Eli." The breathing on the other end of the line changed. Something moved in it. Her voice broke, and this time she didn't control it, and in the break was something that had needed to break for a very long time. "He's got Eli inside," she said. "He came back from wherever he was, and he got Eli out of the yard, and he's—" a breath, ragged. "He's not hurting him. He's got him inside. He wants Eli in sight." A man who knew a caseworker was coming, who'd placed his stepson in his field of view, who was going to present at 4 o'clock a cooperative family in the same house where a child had been sleeping in a gap between a fence and a shed since spring. "Sandra," Ronan said, "your mother's name is Rose." The silence that followed that sentence was absolute. "She misses you," Ronan said. She never stopped. He heard Sandra Brooks breathe. He heard, in that breath, the exact shape of a woman at the edge of something she'd been standing at the edge of for a very long time, looking at the distance to the other side and calculating whether she could cross it and what it would cost her if she fell. 4 o'clock, Sandra said. Her voice was barely there. 4 o'clock, Ronan said. The line went dead. Ronan sat in the truck. The sun had dropped behind the ridge and the cold had teeth now. Petey was still at the window, had been there through the whole call, reading the parts of it he could hear. "How long?" Petey said. 32 minutes. "We staying?" Ronan looked at the gas station, at the 8 motorcycles and the 7 brothers in the October cold, who had not been asked to stay, but who were going to stay because the specific moral vocabulary of the Appalachian Iron Brotherhood did not contain a sentence that ended with, "and then we left." "Yeah," Ronan said. "All right," Petey said. He walked back to his bike, and Ronan sat. He sat with the phone in his hand. He sat with 32 minutes between him and whatever 4 o'clock was going to be, what it was going to reveal, what it was going to set in motion, what it was going to require from a system that had already failed once, and a man who had failed once at something it had taken him 30 years to find a way back toward. He sat, and he breathed, and he watched the bend in Route 70. And somewhere down that road, in a gray house with a black mailbox, a woman named Sandra stood in her kitchen with a dead phone pressed against her chest, and a man in the next room and a 7-year-old boy sitting very still on the couch, and the specific, fragile, improbable weight of a decision she was not sure she was strong enough to make, but was, for the first time in 7 months, actually considering. And Denny Holt, who had survived every system that had tried to contain him, sat in his chair and watched his stepson and checked his watch and calculated. He did not know, yet, about Rose Audette's voicemail. He did not know yet about Tommy Bridger's motion. He did not know that the photograph he'd sent as a warning had been forwarded to both of them within 3 minutes of arriving. He did not know what 8 motorcycles in a gas station parking lot a half-mile from his house actually meant, beyond what they'd shown him, which was restraint, discipline. Men who had chosen to be present rather than dangerous. What he did not know and could not have calculated was that restraint and discipline were not the absence of something. They were the preparation for it. And 4 o'clock was coming. And Bethany Oakes had never, in 7 years of casework, had a motion for emergency reassessment filed simultaneously with her home visit. And in 6 hours, everything that Denny Holt had built and managed and carefully maintained was going to begin to come apart at the seams. Not because someone had come to his door with violence, but because 3 people, a mechanic, a paralegal, and a grandmother in Cookville, had spent 1 week building something that a photograph and a voicemail and a woman's name could not stop. 4 o'clock. 29 minutes. The cold came off the ridge, the ice machine groaned, and Ronan Mercer sat in his truck with his scarred hands on the wheel and breathed and waited and held the line between the man he used to be and the man Eli Brooks needed him to be with everything he had. Bethany Oakes arrived at 4:03. Ronan watched her pull into the road from the gas station lot. A white government sedan, a dent in the rear quarter panel, a parking permit hanging from the mirror. She drove with the careful deliberateness of someone who was paying attention to more than the road. She'd called him at 3:50 to confirm she was still coming, and he'd told her about the photograph, about Sandra's call, about Denny having the boy inside. She'd listened without interrupting. When he finished, she said, "I'm bringing my supervisor." That was the first time he'd heard something that sounded like alarm in her voice. The white sedan was followed by a gray one, 2 caseworkers. Bethany Oakes and a man Ronan didn't know, older, with the bearing of someone who had learned long ago to walk into difficult rooms as though he owned them. They pulled down the road toward the gray house together, and Ronan watched until they turned into the driveway and disappeared. Petey walked over. "We waiting?" "We're waiting," Ronan said. The brothers settled back in. Someone produced a thermos. The cold off the ridge had gotten serious, the kind of cold that finds the gaps in your clothing and stays there. Nobody complained. Nobody left. At 4:31, Ronan's phone rang. Tommy Bridger. "The motion's filed," Tommy said. "Judge Harlan's clerk confirmed receipt. It's on the afternoon docket for tomorrow morning." "Tomorrow morning," Ronan said. "Best I could do." "But Ronan, the voicemail from Rose Audette is on the record now. I submitted it as an exhibit. Denny Holt threatening the maternal grandmother with false accusations of child abuse in order to prevent contact with her daughter and grandson. That is not a small thing. That is obstruction of a family safety network. Combined with the child's documented statements and the February hospital record, we have—" Tommy paused. "We have enough to make the morning very uncomfortable for Dennis Holt." Ronan looked at the road. "If the caseworkers find anything today," Tommy said, "call me immediately. Any hour." At 5:17, the 2 sedans came back up the road. They did not stop at the gas station. They kept going, toward Harlan Crossing proper, and Ronan followed them in his truck because Bethany had texted him 2 words during those 74 minutes that he'd been sitting on like a coal. "Call me." He pulled into the parking lot of a closed hardware store, a 1/4 mile up Route 70, and called. She picked up immediately. "We saw Eli," she said. "And?" A breath. "New bruising, left cheekbone and jaw, consistent with blunt force impact, recent." A pause. "He says he fell. Off his bike." "He doesn't have a bike," Ronan said. "I know." "What does your supervisor say?" "He's on the phone with the district director right now." Her voice had shed the last of its procedural caution. What was underneath was something that had been there the whole time, he realized. Not indifference, but a person who had been operating under a crushing caseload and had not had the weight of documentation that made urgency possible to act on. "Mr. Mercer, you said the child told you he's been sleeping outside since spring." Since spring, his words. He wouldn't repeat that to us. He wouldn't say anything that contradicted Denny Holt's account. "He's scared," Ronan said. "I understand that, but without the child's corroboration—" "The court motion is filed," Ronan said. "Tommy Bridger, attorney. It's on Judge Harlan's docket tomorrow morning. The voicemail of Denny threatening the grandmother is an exhibit." Silence. Then, "I didn't know that." "Now you do." Another silence. "My supervisor is recommending emergency removal pending the hearing," she said. "But it requires—" "Do it," Ronan said. "It requires the district director's approval and a law enforcement presence. That is not tonight, Mr. Mercer. That is, we're looking at tomorrow, after the hearing." He sat in the parking lot of the closed hardware store in the dark and breathed through everything that rose in him. "Is he safe tonight?" he said. Bethany was quiet for a moment. "We cannot guarantee— is he safe tonight?" "Mr. Mercer, I will do everything within my authority to move this as fast as possible. I will be on the phone with the district director until I have approval. I will be at that courthouse tomorrow morning." He closed his eyes. "Okay," he said. "Okay." He drove back to the gas station and told Petey. Petey stood listening with his arms crossed and his face doing the thing it did when he was holding something back, a slight tightening around the jaw, a stillness in the eyes that wasn't blankness, but its opposite. "So, the kid's in there tonight," Petey said. "Yeah." "With him?" "Yeah." Petey looked at the road toward the gray house. He looked for a long time. Then he uncrossed his arms and walked back to his bike and said something to Cobb, the brother nearest him, that Ronan couldn't hear. Ronan called Eli's prepaid at 5:40. It rang 6 times and went to the automated voicemail. He tried twice more over the next hour. Same result. At 7, Knox called. "You need to come to the chapter house," Knox said. "I'm not leaving Harlan Crossing until—" "Ronan." Something in Knox's voice. Not urgency. Knox's voice didn't do urgency. It did gravity. And what it was doing now was gravity at a frequency Ronan had only heard a few times in 16 years. "Come to the chapter house. Now. Bring Tommy if you can reach him." "What happened?" "Come to the chapter house." The Appalachian Iron Brotherhood chapter house in Knoxville was a converted auto body shop on the east side of the city. The kind of building that had been bought for almost nothing in the 90s when the neighborhood wanted nothing to do with it, and was now surrounded by the gradual encroachment of coffee shops and renovated storefronts that still gave the chapter house a wide berth out of an instinct they couldn't have articulated. The garage bays had been converted into a meeting space and workshop. The old paint room in the back was Knox's office. The smell of the place was axle grease and old wood and whatever someone was always cooking on the propane stove near the back door. Ronan got there at 8:15. Tommy arrived 7 minutes later in his car, jacket on over a dress shirt, the attorney's version of dressed for something he hadn't planned for. Knox was in the garage bay. So were Petey, Cobb, and a man Ronan didn't immediately recognize. Mid-50s, heavy, with a road-weathered face and the look of someone who had driven a significant distance in a short time. His jacket had a different patch. Not the Brotherhood. The Iron Covenant, a chapter out of Nashville, one of the Brotherhood's allied clubs. The man's name, Ronan would learn in the next 60 seconds, was Dutch Marvell, and he had driven from Nashville in 3 hours and 40 minutes, which meant he'd broken multiple laws to get there. Knox looked at Ronan when he walked in, then at Tommy. "Close the bay door," Knox said to nobody in particular. Cobb did it. The noise of the street disappeared and the garage held its own sounds. The hum of a space heater in the corner, the tick of a cooling engine somewhere, the breathing of 5 men. Knox sat on the edge of a workbench. He looked at Dutch. "Tell him," Knox said. Dutch had his hands around a coffee mug that had long since gone cold. He looked at Ronan with the eyes of a man delivering information he'd spent the drive hoping he wouldn't have to deliver. "Dennis Holt," Dutch said. "You know what he did before Harlan Crossing?" "No," Ronan said. "Cookville first, before that Sparta. Before that, a place in Kentucky called Irvine." Dutch set the mug down on the workbench. "Same pattern every place. Moved in, found a woman with a kid or kids, got established, controlled the household. When it started cracking, when someone started looking, he moved." Ronan felt something settle in his chest, something cold and definitional. "How many times?" he said. "That we can document? 3 places before Harlan Crossing." Dutch looked at his hands. "There's a boy in Sparta, name's Marcus, 11 years old now. His mother's name is Deanna. Denny Holt was in their house for 16 months. He paused. "The boy had a broken arm at 9 months in. Deanna told the hospital she dropped him." The garage was silent. "Where's Denny in Sparta now, Sam?" Tommy said. He had his legal pad already out, pen in hand, the attorney's reflex of converting the unbearable into the documentable. "Gone," Dutch said. "Case was opened. He was gone in 2 weeks. Took Deanna with him. Left her at a bus stop in Crossville 6 months later when she ran out of uses." Dutch's jaw moved. "The boy Marcus stayed with Deanna's sister. He's okay now, mostly." "Kentucky," Ronan said. "Irvine. Woman named Patrice. 2 daughters, 9 and 6. Denny was there 14 months. No CPS case was ever opened because Patrice's sister reported to us first, not to the county, because she'd seen what the county did with Denny in Sparta." Dutch looked at Knox. "That's how the Iron Covenant got involved. Patrice's brother-in-law rides with our chapter. When the sister called him, he called me." "What happened in Irvine?" Tommy said. Dutch was quiet for a moment. "We put eyes on the house for 3 weeks. We documented everything. We handed it to a lawyer who handed it to the county." A pause. "The county opened an assessment. Denny was gone the next morning. Patrice eventually left too. We don't know where she went. He looked at his hands again. The girls were with Patrice, far as we know. The space heater hummed. The garage breathed. He's been doing this for at least 4 years, Ronan said. Not a question. At least, Dutch said. Maybe longer. The pattern's too clean to be something he invented in Sparta. He knows exactly how long he can stay before a system catches up to him. He knows how to manage a first visit. He knows how to make the woman tell the story he needs her to tell. Dutch's voice had gone flat in the specific way of a man containing something very large. He studies them, the caseworkers, the process, the timeline. He knows the system better than most people who work in it. Tommy was writing, fast, precise, his pen moving in the way it moved when he was building something in real time. The voicemail, Tommy said without looking up. The threat to Rose Audette. Has he made similar threats to the women in the other situations? To prevent contact with their families? In Sparta, Dutch said, Deanna's mother tried to call CPS herself 3 months in. Deanna called her back within an hour and told her if she called anyone again, Denny would make sure she lost her nursing license on a fabricated drug charge. Deanna was crying the whole call. The mother recorded it. He paused. Sound familiar? Tommy stopped writing. He looked up. Ronan looked at Knox. He's not a man who drinks too much and loses control, Ronan said. No, Knox said. He's not. He's organized. Yeah. He picked Sandra. He picked Harlan Crossing. He picked the timeline. Yeah. Ronan looked at the garage floor. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about Denny Holt making a sandwich in a good mood the day after the caseworker left. He thought about a photograph taken from outside a cedar stand. He thought about 5 words in a text message. I know. He thought about Eli, right now, in a gray house, with a man who had done this at least 3 times before and had gotten better at it every time. The morning hearing, Ronan said to Tommy. Yes, Tommy said. He was already thinking the same thing. Ronan could see it, the attorney's mind assembling, cross-referencing, building the architecture of what the morning needed to be. Dutch, I need everything you have, the Sparta case number, the Irvine information, the mother's recording from Sparta, that is gold, that is pattern evidence, that changes the entire character of what we put in front of Judge Harlan tomorrow. He looked at Dutch. Can you get me that recording tonight? I've got Deanna's mother's number, Dutch said. I can call her right now. Call her, Tommy said. Dutch stepped away, phone to his ear. Tommy was writing again furiously, reconstructing his motion in real time, adding columns to the architecture, transforming a document about a single child in a single house into something that described a man and his method. Knox slid off the workbench and stood beside Ronan. They stood in the way Brotherhood men sometimes stand, not looking at each other, both looking at the same middle distance, saying things through proximity that would have been harder to say face to face. You okay? Knox said. No, Ronan said. All right. I've been sitting in a parking lot for a week treating this like... Ronan stopped, started again. I've been treating him like a drunk man who hit a child. Like a situation I hadn't encountered before, like something the system needed educating about. You built the record, Knox said. You moved the pieces right. You didn't go to the house. Because I thought it was about patience, Ronan said. I thought patience was the play. I didn't know he was running a clock on us. Knox looked at the floor. He's been running the same clock on 3 other situations and walking away clean. Not this time, Ronan said. No, Knox said. Not this time. Ronan's phone buzzed. He looked at it. Eli's number. He answered before the buzz finished. Eli, he said, breathing, careful, the sound of a small space, a bathroom, maybe, or a closet, somewhere with hard walls. He knows about the lawyer, Eli whispered. Something twisted in Ronan's gut. How? He's on the phone. He was yelling. He knows there's a hearing tomorrow. A breath. He's packing. Ronan's whole body went still. What do you mean packing? Bags. He's putting bags in the truck. A pause so small it barely existed. He told my mom to pack. He said... The boy's voice fractured at the edges, and he controlled it, physically controlled it, the way Ronan had been watching him control things all week. He said, "We're leaving tonight." Ronan turned. Knox saw his face and was already moving, already nodding to Cobb across the garage. "Eli," Ronan said. "Where are you right now?" "Bathroom, second floor." "Is the door locked?" "Yeah." "Okay, I need you to stay in that bathroom. I need you to not open that door for anyone but your mom. Can you do that?" "He's going to hear me if I—" "Eli, listen to me." His voice dropped, stripped down to its essential elements. Not soft, not gentle, but direct. The way you talk to someone who is in genuine danger and needs to function. Lock the door. Sit against the wall under the window. Don't make sound. I'm going to call the police right now, and I'm going to call Bethany, and we're going to— He said if the police come, he'll tell them— Eli's breath caught. He said he has a video. Ronan stopped. "What video?" he said. "Of you," Eli whispered. "At the gas station talking to me. He said—" The boy's voice dropped to almost nothing. "He said he told the police you've been grooming me. He said he filed a report 2 days ago. He said if you call the police, they're going to arrest you, not him." The garage was loud with silence. Ronan looked at Knox. Knox's face had gone to something he recognized from their worst years together. Not anger, but the absolute pre-anger stillness of a man whose threat assessment had just recalibrated. "Is that true?" Tommy said from behind him. Ronan hadn't heard him cross the garage. "He's been photographing me since at least yesterday," Ronan said. "He sent me a photo of my truck. He knows my name. He's had 2 days to—" He stopped. Thought. "If he filed a complaint with the county sheriff claiming I was—" He couldn't finish the sentence, not with Eli's voice still in his ear. "It's a move," Tommy said. His voice was very precise. "It's a move designed to neutralize you. If you call law enforcement and there's a complaint on file against you, the responding officer's first priority shifts. That's what he wants." "Eli," Ronan said into the phone. "You still there?" "Yeah." "Stay in the bathroom. I'm going to handle this. But Eli, if he tries to break down that door, you open the window and you scream. You scream as loud as you can for as long as you can. You understand?" "Yeah," Eli said. One syllable. Steady. "Good," Ronan said. "You're doing good." He hung up and looked at Tommy. "How do we call law enforcement without triggering whatever Denny filed?" Tommy was already calling. "I'm calling Judge Harlan's emergency line, Chet," he said. "The motion's already filed. If I can reach him tonight, if I can get him to move the hearing to emergency status tonight rather than tomorrow morning." He was walking, pacing the length of the garage, phone pressed to his ear. Ronan looked at Knox. "He's going to run," Ronan said. "Yeah." "He loads that truck. He drives west. We never see him again. He finds another town, another Sandra." He breathed. "Another Eli." Knox said nothing. He was very still. "Knox," Ronan said. "I know," Knox said. "I'm not asking you to—" "I know what you're not asking." Knox looked at him. "And I know what you are." The garage held that. From the corner of the space, Dutch said, "I've got Deanna's mother. She'll send the recording." He looked at Tommy's back. "She'll testify if needed. She's been waiting for someone to call her for 2 years." Tommy turned. His call hadn't connected. He lowered the phone and looked at Ronan with an expression that had stripped itself of everything professional. What was underneath was what had always been underneath. A man who rode, who had been in rooms like this before, who knew that the distance between the legal play and the necessary play was sometimes very small and sometimes infinite. "I can't reach Harlan," Tommy said. "Emergency line goes to the clerk. Clerk is not empowered to move a docket." He paused. "Law enforcement is the only move that stops him from leaving tonight, which means we have to call the sheriff." "And the complaint Denny filed," Ronan said. "May or may not exist," Tommy said. "He told a child about it. That could be true. It could be something he said to a 7-year-old to create exactly this, to make Ronan hesitate before calling law enforcement, giving him the window he needs." Ronan thought about that. He thought about the photograph, the text, the efficiency of it. "I know. A man who knew how systems worked and how to fold them." "He might be bluffing," Ronan said. "He might be," Tommy said. "Or he filed something that makes the next 10 minutes a nightmare regardless." "Or that," Tommy said. Yes. The space heater hummed. Dutch's voice in the corner was low and steady, talking to a woman in Sparta who had been waiting 2 years to be useful. Tommy held his legal pad against his chest. Knox stood with his hands at his sides with the particular quality of a man who was not going to initiate a thing and was also not going to stop it. And Ronan Mercer stood in the middle of his chapter's garage at 8:47 in the evening, with the complete architecture of the situation mapped in his mind, every angle, every consequence, every version of the next hour, and recognized what it required. Not patience, not documentation, not the careful, deliberate, system-respecting version of himself that he had been building for 15 years. What it required was the version of him that had existed before all of that. The one that moved without hesitation when something needed to be moved. The one that had been useful in a ditch outside Kandahar and destructive in a bar in Murfreesboro, and that he had spent a very long time learning to contain. He was going to have to let some of that out. But not, and this was the thing, the only thing, the line between him and what Denny Holt deserved in a more primitive version of justice, not toward Denny. Toward the room, toward the system, toward every person and mechanism that could be moved by a man who stopped being careful and started being whatever the moment required. He looked at Knox. "Call every chapter," Ronan said. Knox waited. "Not for the house," Ronan said. "For the courthouse, tomorrow morning. I don't care what time the hearing is. I don't care what Denny filed or didn't file. I don't care what his lawyer says. I want every brother within 2 hours of Knoxville standing on that courthouse lawn when the doors open." He breathed. Not for intimidation, for witness. For the kind of presence that tells a judge that this community is watching what happens in his courtroom. Knox looked at him for a long moment. "And tonight?" Knox said. "Tonight," Ronan said, "I'm calling the sheriff. Under my own name. I'm telling them a man at that address is attempting to flee with a minor child who has documented injuries and an open CPS case. And if there's a complaint filed against me, if Denny was telling the truth, then I'm standing in front of whatever comes from that because I am done calculating what it costs me." He paused. Something settled in his chest that had not been settled in 30 years. "I was afraid to do enough for Danny," he said. "I am not afraid of this." Knox held his gaze. Then he picked up his phone and started to dial. And in the moment before the call connected, in the half-second of silence between the intention and the action, the chapter house door opened. Maeve walked in. She was in her coat, her hair still in the knot she wore to work, and she was carrying her laptop and the full legal pad from the kitchen table, and she had the look on her face that she got when she had been thinking faster than everyone else in the room and was now here to prove it. She looked at Ronan, she looked at the room, she looked at Tommy. "Judge Harlan's home number," she said. "He went to law school with a woman in my office. I have been on the phone for 40 minutes. She held out a piece of paper. "If you call this number right now and tell him what Dutch just told you, he can issue an emergency order tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." The garage held its breath. Tommy crossed the floor in 4 steps and took the paper. He looked at Ronan. Ronan looked at his wife. Maeve looked back at him with those brown eyes that missed nothing and said, without saying it, the thing she always said, "I'm here. We're doing this together. Stop being surprised." "Make the call," Ronan said. And Tommy Bridger dialed the home number of a judge who was about to have a very unexpected evening, while Knox Hadley started contacting every chapter in East Tennessee, and Dutch Marvel stood in the corner of a garage in Knoxville, confirming to a woman in Sparta that her 2 years of waiting were finally, irrevocably over. And in a gray house with a black mailbox half a mile off Route 70, a man named Denny Holt was moving bags toward a truck, confident, as he had been confident 3 times before, that he knew exactly how much time he had. He did not know about Judge Harlan's home phone number. He did not know about the woman in Sparta. He did not know that 700 miles of East Tennessee Road held men who were, right now, checking their fuel and pulling on their leather and pointing their machines toward Knoxville. He did not know that the system he had learned to outrun had just acquired new legs. But in a locked bathroom on the 2nd floor, a boy named Eli sat on the cold tile with his back against the wall, and the prepaid phone held against his chest, and listened to the sounds of the house below him, and breathed and waited. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, Felt something that was not quite hope yet, but was close enough to hope that he could not name it as anything else. Judge Harlan picked up on the second ring. He was 64 years old and had been on the bench for 19 of them, and Tommy Bridger knew him well enough to know that the man did not appreciate his home number being used and would make that clear before he listened to anything else. That was exactly what happened. 20 seconds of controlled irritation that Tommy absorbed without apology or deflection, simply waiting for it to finish the way you wait for an engine to stop turning over before you work on it. Then Tommy talked. He talked for 4 minutes without stopping. He laid it out in the precise, sequenced language of a man who had spent the drive from Magnolia Street reconstructing the architecture of the case in his head. Not as a narrative, but as a legal argument, cause and effect, documented evidence, patterned behavior across 3 jurisdictions, a child with fresh bruising in a locked bathroom, a man loading bags into a truck. When Tommy finished, Judge Harlan was quiet for 11 seconds. Ronan counted them. "You have the recordings from Sparta?" the judge said. "Being transmitted to my phone as we speak. The CPS case number. Open. District 4. Assigned to Bethany Oaks. Initial assessment conducted today. Supervisor present. Recommendation for emergency removal already submitted to District Director. And the motion you filed this afternoon. On your afternoon docket, you have the exhibit list." Another silence, shorter. "I'm going to need you to send me everything you just described," Judge Harlan said. "My email. Tonight. Within the next 30 minutes. "It's already drafted," Tommy said. Which it was. Maeve had been building the exhibit package on her laptop since she walked through the chapter house door, fingers moving with the focused speed of someone converting urgency into files and folders. Her legal pad translating itself into a digital submission package with the precision of someone who had spent 11 years turning chaos into court-ready documents. "If what you've described is accurate," the judge said, "I can issue an emergency protective order tonight. That order will require law enforcement presence at the address to prevent the child from being removed from the county pending the hearing." "That's what we need," Tommy said. "The hearing moves to 8 a.m., the judge said. "My courtroom." "We'll be there." The call ended. Tommy looked at Maeve. Maeve looked at her laptop. She hit send. 30 minutes, she said. It took 22. At 9:43, Tommy's phone buzzed. He read the screen, looked up, and said 2 words. "Orders issued." The chapter house exhaled. Knox was already on his second phone call. He'd been moving through the chapter network for the last hour with the quiet efficiency of a man running an operation he'd planned for. Which he hadn't, technically. But Knox Hadley's particular gift was treating contingency as preparation, meeting every development with the calm of someone who had already considered it. Ronan called Bethany Oaks. She picked up immediately, which meant she'd been awake, which meant she'd been waiting. "There's an emergency protective order," Ronan said. "Judge Harlan. Issued 10 minutes ago. The child cannot leave the county. Law enforcement needs to go to that address tonight." A sound on her end, not surprise. Something beneath surprise, something closer to relief. "I've been on the phone with my district director for 2 hours," she said. "Emergency removal was approved 40 minutes ago. We were waiting on the order." A pause. "Sheriff's deputy is already being dispatched." "How long?" 20 minutes, maybe less." "Denny's been loading bags," Ronan said. "He's been at it since 8:30. "I understand," she said. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yeah." "The complaint filed against you." Her voice changed register. "I looked it up 20 minutes ago. There is a complaint on file with the county sheriff, made Tuesday. Dennis Holt, alleging harassment and inappropriate contact with a minor." A pause. "The deputy responding tonight is aware of it. I can't tell you how they'll handle the interaction." Ronan held the phone. "I understand," he said. He looked at Knox. Knox had been listening, and his face had already processed the information and moved through it to the next thing. "You're not going to the house," Knox said. It wasn't a question. "I know," Ronan said. "The order takes care of tonight," Knox said. "The hearing takes care of tomorrow. You stay away from that address until the deputy is done and Eli is out." "I know," Ronan said again. "Do you?" He breathed. He looked at his hands. He looked at the wall of the chapter house where someone had, years ago, hung a piece of sheet metal with the Brotherhood's founding year welded into it in rough letters. 1987. Before he'd joined. Before most of these men had joined. A different time. "Yeah," he said. "I know." He sat on a workbench and he waited, which was the hardest thing, which was always the hardest thing, which was the thing that the last 15 years had been teaching him with the patience of a very long lesson. At 10:19, the prepaid phone buzzed. Not Eli's voice, a sound, a recording, thumb pressed accidentally to the call button, the phone transmitting ambient audio. He almost hung up. He didn't. He heard voices. Denny's voice, low and controlled, with the specific tonality of controlled anger. Not shouting, worse than shouting. The voice of a man who has learned that volume is less efficient than precision. Told you to pack the blue bag. Not Sandra's voice, quieter. I did. Look at me when I'm... A sound, not impact. The sound of something being set down hard, or a hand on a surface. Then Eli's voice, unexpected. From somewhere above, still on the second floor, still away from the main action, but close enough to the door that the phone caught it. "Mom." Just that, just the one word. But the way a child says a parent's name when they are scared and certain that fear is not going to change anything, and say it anyway because saying it is the last thing they can do. Ronan was off the workbench, Knox's hand on his arm, not grabbing, placed, deliberate. "The deputy's en route," Knox said. I know what you heard." Knox's grip tightened, not restraint exactly, something more like ballast. "The deputy is 12 minutes out. You go to that house right now and the complaint Denny filed becomes the story. You become the story. Eli becomes evidence in a case about you instead of a child who needs to be somewhere safe." Ronan looked at him. His chest was doing something that made breathing an act of will. 12 minutes, Knox said. Ronan stood in the middle of the chapter house floor and held 12 minutes in his body like a physical object, like something with weight and edges. He stood with Knox's hand on his arm and the ambient sound from the prepaid phone still audible. Movement now, footsteps, the sound of a door. And he held 12 minutes the way you hold something that is trying to get away from you. Ronan, Maeve's voice. She had crossed the garage without him noticing. She was standing in front of him now, not touching him, just there, her brown eyes steady, her laptop closed under her arm, her legal pad pressed to her side. "Hey," she said. "Hey," he said. "Look at me." He looked at her. "Eli is in that bathroom," she said. "He has been in that bathroom for 2 hours. He has been in that house for 7 months. He has been in situations like this, in one form or another, for at least a year." She held his gaze. "He is still there. He is still holding on. He is waiting." "I know," Ronan said. "Then let him have the 12 minutes," she said. "He's earned them." Something broke loose in Ronan's chest and resettled. He breathed. He nodded. Maeve stepped back. Knox took his hand off Ronan's arm. Dutch, in the corner, had his eyes on the floor, with the courtesy of a man who understood what he'd just witnessed and was not going to comment on it. 11 minutes and 40 seconds later, Ronan's phone rang. Unknown number, County Exchange. He answered. "Mr. Mercer," a man's voice, professional, slightly careful. "This is Deputy Cal Withers, Knox County Sheriff's Department. I'm at 4417 Render Road, Harlan Crossing. I have the child." A pause. "He's okay. He's with the CPS worker." Ronan sat down on the workbench. "Okay," he said. His voice came out rougher than he expected. "I need to inform you," Deputy Withers said, "that there is a complaint on file against you with this office, made Tuesday by Dennis Holt. Given the emergency protective order and the nature of tonight's removal, my sergeant has determined that the complaint will be reviewed in context of the full case file before any further action is taken." A pause. "That's not a resolution. That's just where things are tonight." "I understand," Ronan said. "The child asked for you," Deputy Withers said. And then, slightly differently, the professional register dropping by a half step into something more human. "He asked by name, said, Quote, "Is Ronan coming?" Ronan's jaw tightened. He looked at the floor. "Can I see him?" he said. "Not tonight," the deputy said. "He's going into emergency placement. Standard protocol. You can—" He paused. "Your attorney can request contact tomorrow, after the hearing." "Okay," Ronan said. "Where's Denny?" A pause. "Mister." "Holt is being detained for questioning," Deputy Withers said. "Given the order and the evidence presented, there are grounds for—" He stopped. "Your attorney will have the full picture in the morning." The call ended. Ronan held the phone in both hands and looked at it. "Eli's out," he said. The chapter house absorbed that in the particular way of a room full of people who have been holding something and have now been told they can set it down. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a collective exhale that changed the texture of the air. Dutch sat down heavily on a stool. Petey, who had arrived at some point in the last hour without Ronan noticing, pulled his cap off and ran a hand through his hair. Cobb looked at the ceiling. Maeve sat down next to Ronan on the workbench and put her hand over his. She didn't say anything. Knox poured coffee from the propane stove's ancient percolator into 2 mismatched mugs and set one in front of Ronan. Then he sat down across from him on an overturned crate and looked at him directly. "Morning," Knox said. "Morning," Ronan said. "How many can you get to Knoxville by 8? Knox looked at the ceiling, doing the calculation Ronan had already seen him starting. The chapter network, the distances, the men who could ride through the night, and the men who'd need to leave before dawn. The allied chapters, the Iron Covenant from Nashville, 2 other clubs Knox had been cultivating relationships with for years, men who were not brothers, but who understood what it meant to be present in the ways that mattered. 700, Knox said. "Maybe more." Ronan looked at him. "You said every chapter within 2 hours, Knox said. I extended that to 3. "But not—" 700 men and women on motorcycles in front of a courthouse are not a threat, Knox said. 700 people who show up in the dark and are standing there when the sun comes up. That's a statement. That's a community telling a judge that they're watching. He held Ronan's gaze. "That's what you said you wanted." "I said witness," Ronan said. "I said presence." "That's what I said," Knox said. Ronan looked at his coffee. He thought about what 700 motorcycles sounded like arriving in the pre-dawn cold outside a courthouse. He thought about what it looked like to a judge walking to work. He thought about what it looked like to a man named Dennis Holt, sitting in a county holding room, hearing that sound through a window. He thought about what it looked like to a 7-year-old boy. "Okay," he said. Knox nodded once. He picked up his phone again. "Okay." They left the chapter house at 2 in the morning. Not because the work was done. Tommy would be at his office until 4. Maeve would be building exhibit files until she fell asleep at the kitchen table. But because there was a point at which staying was avoidance and going home was the harder thing. The thing that required admitting that tonight was over and tomorrow was coming, and that what came tomorrow was outside his direct control. Ronan rode home. The Knoxville streets were almost empty, just the orange wash of sodium lights and the occasional truck, and the Softail's engine was the loudest thing on the road. He rode without thought, or tried to. The mind did what it did regardless. He thought about Eli in an emergency placement. Some house he'd never been to, a bed that wasn't his, strange sounds in the walls. A child who had survived the particular algebra of Denny Holt's household and was now in a new unknown. That was its own difficulty. Ronan knew enough about the foster system to know that emergency placement was not the same as safety, that it was a better version of uncertainty rather than the end of it. He thought about Sandra Brooks. He didn't know where she was tonight. The deputy hadn't mentioned her, and Ronan had not thought to ask in the specific compressed urgency of those few minutes on the phone, whether she'd been separated from Denny in the course of the evening, or whether she was still in that house, or whether she'd managed to get herself somewhere that wasn't either of those things. He didn't know. He thought about Rose Audette in Cookville, who had sent her voicemail and her testimony, and her 2 years of waiting down the line to Tommy Bridger, and who did not yet know that her grandson was out. He texted her when he got home. Just, "Eli is safe tonight. Court tomorrow 8 a.m. I'll call in the morning." She responded in 30 seconds. "Thank you." Maeve was already at the kitchen table when he came in. She looked up from her laptop. "You should sleep," he said. "So should you," she said. He sat down across from her. The kitchen was the same as it always was. The good coffee maker, the dented pot from the camping trip they'd taken to the Smokies 6 years ago that lived on the back burner and never got put away. The legal pads and the pencil cup and the reading glasses she always pushed up onto her head. "What time is your first client tomorrow?" he said. "I moved everything." She looked at the screen. "I'm going to the courthouse." "Maeve, don't," she said, pleasantly but definitively. He stopped. She looked at him over the laptop screen. "I've been building this case for a week," she said. "I want to see it." He thought about arguing. He didn't. "Okay," he said. He went to bed. He lay in the dark and listened to Maeve's fingers on the keyboard from the kitchen. He thought about Eli asking the deputy is Ronan coming. He thought about what a 7-year-old had held together in the previous 12 hours, in the previous 7 months, and however many months before that of a previous version of this same situation. He thought about Danny. He let himself think about Danny for the first time in several days without flinching away from it. He let the thought be complete, not the guilt part, not the procedural replay of what he should have done differently, but the simpler thing underneath all of that. His brother. 7 years old. Blue eyes. A habit of collecting interesting rocks and keeping them in his pockets until his jeans wore holes from the weight of them. He breathed. He slept for 3 hours. He was at the courthouse by 6:15. He was not the first one there. Petey's bike was already on the street. Cobb's. 4 from the Knoxville chapter that he recognized, and 2 he didn't. By 6:30, there were 20. By 7, there were 60. They came in groups and in singles, headlights arriving from every direction in the pre-dawn dark, engines dropping to idle and then to silence as riders killed ignitions and swung off bikes and stood on the courthouse grounds, with the specific unhurried quality of people who had woken before the sun, because something mattered more than sleep. The sound of it, the waves of arrival, each group of engines audible from several blocks away before they materialized into shapes under the parking lot lights, built into something that Ronan felt in his sternum, not aggressive, not triumphant, something that was simply large, something that had a weight and a presence that changed the character of the morning around it. By 7:45, the count was somewhere past 300 and still growing. Knox stood near the courthouse steps with Dutch beside him, the two of them talking in the low, calm way of men overseeing something that was moving correctly and needed only monitoring. Women had come too. Partners, wives, riders in their own right, and they stood among the leather and the chrome and the cold breath of the morning with the same quality everyone else had, present, still, deliberate. Nobody was loud. That was the thing that would stay with Ronan, the silence of it. 300 and then 400 people in motorcycle leathers standing in the cold Tennessee morning outside a courthouse, and the dominant sound was boots on concrete and the distant click of cooling engines and, occasionally, the low exchange of 2 people talking. Not performing, not demonstrating, simply being there, in the physical, undeniable way that 700 boots on courthouse grounds are simply there. Tommy arrived at 7:50 with his briefcase and the look of a man who had slept 2 hours at his desk and was running on the specific fuel of a lawyer who believed in his case. He stopped when he saw the crowd. He looked at Ronan. "Knox," Ronan said. Tommy looked at Knox across the crowd. Knox raised his coffee cup from 30 feet away. Tommy shook his head slightly, not in disapproval, in something closer to recalibrated awe, and went up the courthouse steps. Bethany Oakes arrived at 7:55 with her supervisor and a woman from the district director's office who had the bearing of someone who had been briefed on the overnight developments and had arrived with opinions about them that she was maintaining professionally. Bethany looked at the crowd on the grounds and then at Ronan. He nodded once. She nodded back and went inside. At 7:58, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot and 2 men in suits got out. One of them was young and carried a briefcase with the precise grip of someone junior enough to be anxious. The other was 50-something, gray-templed, with a face that had seen courtrooms and knew how to look at things without reacting. Dennis Holt's attorney. He looked at the crowd. He kept looking for longer than he meant to. Then he said something to the young man with the briefcase, quiet, and they went up the steps. At 8:02, a deputy sheriff's transport vehicle pulled around the far side of the courthouse. Ronan watched it. It stopped at the side entrance. Two figures got out, a deputy, and between them, a man in his own clothes, but with the slightly diminished quality of someone who had spent the night in a county holding room. Heavy set, canvas work jacket, dark hair going gray. Denny Holt. He came around the side of the building and he saw the crowd and he stopped. He stopped in a way that was not the stop of a man surprised. It was the stop of a man recalculating. His eyes moved across the assembled crowd with the rapid assessment of someone who was always doing threat analysis, always reading the room, always measuring the distance between where he was and where he needed to be. His eyes found Ronan. Ronan looked back at him, not with rage. He'd moved through that in the night. What he looked at Denny Holt with was something simpler and more total. The look of a man who had finished being afraid of consequences and was simply there, on the courthouse grounds, at 8 in the morning, in front of 400 witnesses, looking at what he had been dealing with for a week. Denny's jaw set. He looked away first. The deputy moved him toward the side entrance and they went inside and the door closed behind them. Knox was beside Ronan. "How many?" Ronan said. "As of 5 minutes ago," Knox said, 712. Ronan looked at the crowd, at the engines cooling in the morning air, at the men and women who had ridden through the night from Nashville and Chattanooga and Johnson City and Asheville and places further than those, because Knox had called and because the word had moved through the Brotherhood network the way words move through communities that are actually communities, immediately, completely, without the need for explanation. He thought about what this would look like from inside the courthouse, from Judge Harlan's bench, from the windows of the room where Denny Holt's attorney was opening his briefcase. He thought about Eli, in an emergency placement somewhere in Knox County, who did not know any of this was happening, who had been told "I'll be back" and had believed it. "Ronan," Knox said. He looked. Knox was holding his phone out, a text on the screen from a number Ronan didn't recognize. Short. He told them he was going to take Eli out of state, before the order was issued. Told Sandra to get the boy and meet him in Kentucky. She told the deputy. That's why they detained him. Ronan read it twice. "Who sent this?" he said. "Bethany Oakes," Knox said. "She has my number from yesterday." He paused. "Sandra told the deputy, of her own decision, last night." Ronan read the text a third time. Sandra Brooks, in the middle of whatever last night had been, had looked at a deputy sheriff and said the thing she knew would change everything and could not be unsaid. Had given them the evidence that moved Denny from a man being questioned to a man being held. He thought about a crack in a woman's voice on the word arrested. He thought about the specific, fragile, improbable weight of a decision he had not dared to count on. He looked at the courthouse doors. "Okay," he said. He walked up the steps. Tommy met him in the corridor outside the courtroom doors, and there was something in Tommy's face that had not been there this morning when he arrived. Not exactly hope, which was too soft a word for what Tommy Bridger allowed himself, but something adjacent, something that had tightened into confidence. "The Sparta recording came through clean," Tommy said. "Judge Harlan reviewed it with the motion this morning before the session. He's also been informed that Dennis Holt made statements to a county deputy last night indicating intent to remove the child from the state in violation of the order." He paused. "And Ronan?" "Yeah." "Dutch's information turned up something else overnight," Tommy said. "Something I didn't have time to include in the motion. I've requested to present it as supplemental evidence." He looked at Ronan steadily. "There was a child before Sparta, before Dennis Holt had a name we can document. A girl. 8 years old. Whitley County, Kentucky, 2016. Ronan went still. "She's okay," Tommy said quickly. "She's 14 now. She's okay." A pause. "But there's a sealed juvenile record from that year. Dutch has a contact who has confirmed its existence. We can't access it. It's sealed. But I've requested that the judge consider compelling its review as part of a pattern of conduct assessment." The courthouse corridor was cold and smelled of old marble and industrial cleaning fluid, and somewhere from the far end the sound of heels on floor and a voice reading something into a phone. So it's not 3 times, Ronan said. It's at least 4, Tommy said. Possibly more. 4. Or more. Women found and controlled and isolated. Children sleeping in wrong places and lying to hospitals about how they got hurt. A man who had gotten better at this with every iteration, who had treated the systems designed to protect children as a training ground for evading those same systems. He's going to try to say the pattern is circumstantial, Ronan said. He's going to try, Tommy said. His attorney is good. He's going to argue the Sparta case was unresolved. The Kentucky case is sealed. The Irvine case never resulted in charges. He's going to argue that Denny Holt is a man who has been in bad relationships and made poor decisions but is not a demonstrated abuser under the legal definition. He paused. And I'm going to argue the opposite, using every piece of paper Maeve formatted last night, every word Dutch brought from Nashville, every second of that recording from Deanna's mother in Sparta, and the testimony of a boy named Eli Brooks, who, as of 8 this morning, has agreed to speak to a guardian ad litem appointed by this court. Ronan breathed. Eli agreed, he said. Bethany Oakes asked him this morning. He said yes. Tommy paused. He also said something else. He glanced at his notes, though Ronan suspected he didn't need them. He said, I want Ronan to know that I did the thing he told me to do. He said that specifically. He wanted that passed on. The courthouse corridor held that. The boy had stayed in the bathroom. He had held on. He had waited 12 minutes and done every single thing exactly right. Ronan looked at the courtroom doors. Behind them, a judge was waiting. Behind them, Denny Holt's attorney was setting up the argument that Dennis Holt was a misunderstood man. Behind them was the specific, costly, imperfect machinery of a system that had failed 3 times before today and was being asked to function correctly on the 4th. And outside, on this courthouse grounds, 712 people were standing in the October cold, doing the simplest possible thing a community can do. Being there, being visible, saying without a word that they were watching. Ronan looked at Tommy. Tommy looked at him. You ready? Tommy said. Ronan thought about the answer to that. He thought about what ready meant after 30 years of carrying the specific weight of not having been ready when it mattered. He thought about a box that was too small. He thought about a boy who had waited 12 minutes and come out the other side. He reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out the small spiral notebook, the one he'd been carrying all week, the one with Eli's words in it, dated, timed, verbatim. He held it out to Tommy. Everything he told me, Ronan said, in his exact words. Tommy took it. He held it the way you hold something that has weight beyond its physical composition. The courtroom door opened. A clerk stepped out and looked at them. Judge is ready, she said. Tommy went in. Ronan went in. And behind them, through the stone walls of the courthouse, through the thick glass of the windows that lined the east side of the building, barely audible but present in the way that 700 people standing in the cold are present, in the way that choosing to be somewhere rather than anywhere else is a statement that needs no translation, the courthouse grounds held. And Dennis Holt, seated at a table with his gray-templed attorney, looked once at the window, looked at the shapes beyond the glass. And for the first time since Ronan Mercer had sat down on a concrete barrier outside a gas station and watched a boy who was too still, Dennis Holt looked afraid. The judge opened the session. And everything that had been building for a week, for 7 months, for 4 years across 4 states, and an unknown number of children whose names they might never fully recover, came into this room, into this hour, into this moment, where the weight of it had to land somewhere, and someone had to decide what it was worth and what it required. And Ronan Mercer sat in the gallery behind Tommy Bridger's left shoulder with his hands flat on his knees and looked straight ahead and breathed, and waited for the word that would determine whether Eli Brooks slept inside that night, or whether the next version of this same story began somewhere west of Kentucky, with a new name on a mailbox, and a child they didn't know yet, sleeping somewhere wrong. The judge's gavel came down. The hearing lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Ronan knew this because he watched the clock on the courtroom wall the entire time. Not impatiently, not anxiously, but with the focused attention of a man who had decided that watching the clock was better than watching Denny Holt's face. If he watched Denny's face for 4 hours, He would arrive at the end of it having spent 4 hours hating someone, and hate was expensive, and he needed whatever he had left for what came after. Tommy Bridger was extraordinary. Ronan had known him for 12 years and had seen him in courtrooms before. Smaller matters, Brotherhood-adjacent situations, the legal scaffolding that a club occasionally needed when the world misunderstood its character. He'd been good then. He was different now. He was different in the way a person is different when the case matters not as a professional exercise, but as something they are putting themselves into, something they have been awake until 4 in the morning building, because the alternative was a child going west with a man who had already done this 4 times. He laid it out without flourish. The pattern, across 4 jurisdictions, documented and cross-referenced. The recordings. The testimony of Deanna's mother from Sparta, delivered by phone with a clarity that had the courtroom utterly still. The CPS file, the hospital record from February, the emergency order issued overnight, and the statement Deputy Withers had taken from Sandra Brooks at 10:47 the previous evening, in which she had described, with a specificity that came from someone who had finally decided the cost of silence was higher than the cost of speaking, the night in February, and what had preceded it, and what had followed it, and the specific words Denny Holt had used to explain to her what would happen if she called anyone. Denny's attorney was good. He was controlled and precise, and he did exactly what Tommy had predicted, argued each piece of evidence in isolation, attacked the chain of custody on the Sparta recording, questioned the legal standing of Dutch's information from the Iron Covenant, suggested that a mechanic from Knoxville with documented access to the child over a period of days constituted an inappropriate influence on what Eli might or might not testify to a guardian ad litem. Judge Harlan let him finish. Then he looked at the window. The crowd was still there. It had not moved in 4 hours. 700 people in the October cold standing on the courthouse grounds with the patience of something geological. They'd been there since before dawn, and they were still there, and what they were doing with their presence was something the judge could not have ignored even if he'd tried. He did not try. He looked at the window for a long time. Then he looked at his notes. Then he asked a question of the CPS supervisor that lasted 3 minutes and required a detailed answer. Then he was quiet for a full minute in the way judges are quiet, when they have already decided but are giving the moment its due weight. Then Judge Harlan spoke. He spoke for 8 minutes. He cited the pattern evidence, the emergency order, the overnight statement from Sandra Brooks, and the sealed Kentucky record, which he had, on Tommy's motion, reviewed in camera that morning. He did not describe the contents of the sealed record. He did not need to. His face, when he looked up from it toward Denny Holt's attorney, said, "Enough." He ordered immediate and permanent removal of Eli Brooks from the custody of Dennis Holt. He ordered a full criminal referral to the district attorney's office on the basis of the pattern evidence and Sandra Brooks's statement. He commended, in language that was careful and measured and judicial but unmistakably genuine, the coordinated effort of the advocacy network that had presented the case before him. The attorney, the CPS workers, the paralegal who had built the exhibit package, and he said, the community members who chose to be present here today in a manner that demonstrated dignity, restraint, and an investment in this child's welfare that this court found instructive. He did not look at the window when he said it. He didn't need to. The gavel came down. Ronan walked out of the courthouse into the October cold and the crowd and stood on the steps and breathed. The air smelled like exhaust and coming rain and the particular sharpness of a morning that was ending and becoming something else. He stood on the steps and looked out at 700 people who looked back at him with the quiet expectancy of people waiting to know whether the thing they came for had happened. Knox was at the foot of the steps. Ronan looked at him. He nodded once. Knox turned to the crowd and said nothing, but something in his posture communicated the result, and it moved through 700 people like a current, not loudly, not in celebration, but in the specific exhale of people who have been holding something and have now been told they can set it down. Someone started an engine, then another. Then they came in waves, the sound building from single notes into something full and resonant, hundreds of Harleys and other bikes turning over in the courthouse parking lot and on the street, and the sound of it, not leaving, just running, just being present one final time in the cold morning air, was the closest thing to a statement Ronan had ever heard that didn't use words. He stood on the steps and listened to it until the tears came, which he had been expecting somewhere in the back of himself. And he let them come because there was nobody on those steps who would think less of him for it, and he was done performing the absence of feeling in situations that required feeling. Maeve appeared beside him. She didn't say anything. She stood next to him and watched the crowd and let him have the moment. After a while, the engines began going quiet, one by one, and then in groups, riders leaving the way they'd come, in every direction, back to the places they'd driven from in the dark. By 10 o'clock, the courthouse grounds were returning to their ordinary emptiness, just the November-adjacent cold and the faint residual smell of exhaust and boot-scuffed concrete. Dutch Marvel found Ronan at the edge of the lot. "Heading back," Dutch said. He had his helmet in one hand and his keys in the other, and the look of a man who had accomplished something he'd been carrying for 2 years and wasn't quite sure what he was supposed to feel now that the weight was gone. "Dutch," Ronan said. The man looked at him. "Deanna," Ronan said, "and the boy Marcus. If you can get them a message that the Knoxville chapter knows their names. If they ever need—" "I'll tell them," Dutch said. He held out his hand. Ronan shook it. Dutch's grip was the grip of a man who'd driven 3 hours and 40 minutes in the dark and had not considered not doing it. He rode south. Eli was in a county emergency placement house on the east side of Knoxville, a beige ranch house on a quiet street run by a woman named Carol, who had been doing emergency foster care for 14 years and had the particular gift of making institutional necessity feel, if not like home, then at least like a resting place. Bethany Oakes called Ronan at 11:30 to tell him that Tommy had filed for approved visitation and that it would take until the following morning to process. "Can I call him?" Ronan said. A pause. "I'll ask Carol," Bethany said. "She'll have to be present." "That's fine," Ronan said. The call came through at 2 in the afternoon. Ronan was in his truck in the parking lot of a diner on Cumberland Avenue, where he and Maeve had eaten lunch without tasting much of it. He was on his second coffee, which he also wasn't tasting. The phone rang. He picked up. "Hey," Eli said. The single syllable of it. The boy's voice, flat and ordinary and exhausted and intact. "Hey," Ronan said. Silence for a moment. The silence of two people who have said enormous things to each other and are now in the strange territory after enormous things, where the ordinary becomes both insufficient and necessary. "You okay?" Ronan said. "Carol has a dog," Eli said. "A big one. It slept outside my door last night." Ronan closed his eyes. "Yeah?" "His name's Biscuit." A pause. "That's a dumb name for a dog that big." "It is," Ronan said. "What kind is he?" "I don't know. Big and brown." A breath. "He was there when I woke up, still outside the door." Ronan sat in his truck and let that be what it was for a moment. A boy who had spent 7 months sleeping between a fence and a shed, waking up to find a dog outside his door. The specific smallness and completeness of that. "Eli," he said, "I'm going to come see you tomorrow. Me and Maeve, if that's okay." "Okay," the boy said, "and I need you to know something." He paused. He'd been thinking about how to say this since the courthouse, running it through different constructions, trying to find the one that was honest without being a promise he couldn't keep at this specific hour. "We talked to Tommy, our lawyer, and we want to— Maeve and I want to explore whether we can be more involved in your life, long term, in an official way." Silence. "What does that mean?" Eli said. "It means we want you to be somewhere permanent," Ronan said. "Somewhere that's yours. We're going to talk to the right people and figure out what the path looks like. But I want you to know that we're looking at it." A pause. "Okay?" The silence on Eli's end was different from his other silences. Not the survival stillness, not the controlled flatness. Something that was new, something that was feeling its own edges. "Okay," Eli said quietly. They talked for another 10 minutes, about Biscuit, about what Carol had made for lunch, about whether Ronan's shop had any cool cars in it right now. Ordinary things. The machinery of a normal conversation running carefully on new track. When they hung up, Ronan sat in the parking lot for a while. Then he went back inside and ordered more coffee and sat across from Maeve and told her what Eli had said about the dog. Maeve smiled. It was the first full smile he'd seen on her face in a week. Sandra Brooks called him 3 days later. He almost didn't answer. Unknown number, Harlan Crossing Exchange, and his capacity for surprises from that area code was running low. But he answered because not answering felt like a decision he'd have to justify to himself later. "Mr. Mercer," she said. Her voice was different. Not the monitored, coached voice from the phone call during the lockdown. Something rawer. Something that had had 3 days to start the long process of becoming its own again. "Sandra," he said. "I'm at my mother's," she said, "in Cookville." He closed his eyes briefly. "Rose drove down and got me the next morning," Sandra said. "After—" She stopped. "After everything." A pause. "She just showed up. I didn't even call her. She just showed up." Because Rose Audette had gotten a text that said Eli is safe and had driven to Harlan Crossing at sunrise because that was what mothers did when the thing they'd been waiting for finally moved. "I'm glad," Ronan said. And he was. Simply and completely. "I want you to know," Sandra started and then stopped, and started again in a different place. "I know I made it harder. I know there were things I could have said and didn't. I know—" She stopped again. "Sandra," Ronan said. "I'm sorry," she said. "You don't owe me an apology," Ronan said. "You got out. That's what matters." "I should have gotten out sooner, for Eli." He thought about how to answer that. He thought about everything Dutch had told him, about what Denny Holt had looked like to 3 previous women. Systematic, patient, isolating, incrementally increasing the cost of leaving until leaving felt like something that required a kind of courage that was simply not survivable. He thought about a woman whose hand he had broken and then driven to the hospital and then coached on what to say. He was very good at what he did, Ronan said. "That's not an excuse. It's just true." Sandra was quiet. "Can I see him?" she said. "Eli, can I— Is that— I don't know what the rules are." "Talk to Bethany Oakes," Ronan said. "She'll tell you what the process looks like. And Sandra—" He paused. "Tommy Bridger, our attorney. He can help you understand your rights in all of this. He works with people in your situation. Call him." He gave her the number. She wrote it down. He could hear the pen on paper. "Mr. Mercer," she said. "Ronan," he said. "Ronan." She said it carefully, like she was placing something. "Thank you for not giving up on him." He didn't know what to say to that. He let the silence hold it. "Take care of yourself," he said. "Call Tommy." He hung up and sat in the shop. He was in his own garage, had been turning a wrench all morning on a '72 Chevelle that deserved better than the neglect it had received, and looked at the wall above the workbench where he'd pinned the small folded piece of paper on which he'd written, in the first hour of all of this, Eli's exact words. "They make me sleep outside." He'd pinned it there the night he got home, and it had been there all week, just white paper and blue ink, a sentence that weighed more than it looked like it should. He took it down. He looked at it for a moment. Then he put it in the inside pocket of his jacket, the same place he kept the photograph of Danny, and went back to work on the Chevelle. The guardianship process took 9 months. That is the honest accounting of it. 9 months of interviews and home inspections and court dates and paperwork built by Tommy on one side and Maeve on the other. 9 months of supervised visits that became unsupervised visits, that became weekends, that became the particular ordinary chaos of a child gradually learning that the adults in a house were not a threat but a structure. 9 months of Eli sitting at the kitchen table doing homework while Ronan made dinner and Maeve asked questions about his day that were never interrogative and never demanding, and were just the small, consistent proof that someone cared what had happened between 8 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon. The dog, their dog, a rescue from the county shelter that Eli had selected with the absolute deliberateness of a child making the first real choice he'd been allowed to make in a long time, was named by Eli after approximately 30 seconds of consideration. He named her Lace. Because, he explained, With the complete seriousness of a child who had thought about this, she was small and didn't look like much, but she was stronger than she appeared. Ronan had looked at Maeve over the boy's head. Maeve had looked back at him. Neither of them said anything. The dog slept on Eli's bed, every night, for 9 months and counting. The morning the court granted permanent guardianship, Tommy drove from his office to the courthouse himself, which he did not have to do, and sat in the gallery behind Ronan and Maeve, and when the judge made the order, Tommy sat with his hands clasped on the bench in front of him, and his jaw tight in the way of a man containing something that would embarrass him if it arrived. Rose Audette was there. She sat 2 rows back with Sandra, who had been through 4 months of her own proceedings and her own reckoning and was becoming, slowly and at cost, someone she recognized again. She and Ronan did not speak often, but they spoke with the specific mutual understanding of 2 people who loved the same child and had arrived at that love through completely different routes. And that was enough. Bethany Oakes was there. She had driven from her office on her lunch break and was going to be late back and had sent her supervisor a text that said simply at the courthouse, personal matter, and her supervisor had not responded, which in Bethany Oakes' reading meant he understood. Knox was there. He sat in the back in a jacket that was not his riding leather, a plain dark jacket, the kind a man wears when he wants to be present without being a symbol of anything. He sat by himself and did not call attention to himself, and when the order was made, he stood up without ceremony and left before the room started moving. Outside the courthouse, as Ronan came down the steps with Maeve on one side and Eli between them, Knox was leaning against his road king with his arms crossed and his face doing the thing it did when he was holding something and had decided holding it was sufficient. Eli looked at him. He'd met Knox twice. At the shop, in passing, the careful introductions of a child learning the perimeter of a new world. "You the one who called everybody?" Eli said. Knox looked at the boy. "Guilty," he said. Eli thought about this. "How come?" Knox looked at Ronan, then back at the boy. "Because some things are worth showing up for," he said, "and you were one of them." Eli absorbed this with the seriousness he brought to most things. Then he nodded, in the way someone nods when an answer is sufficient, and looked at Ronan. "Can we eat?" he said. "I'm starving." Matt. They went to a diner on the south side that Ronan had been going to for 20 years because it had good coffee and didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. The kind of place with vinyl booths and a laminated menu and a waitress named Dolores who knew what you wanted before you said it. Dolores looked at Eli. "New face," she said. "Eli," Ronan said. "He's ours." 2 words. He's ours. Ronan hadn't planned them. They arrived complete. Dolores looked at the boy, then at Ronan. Then she put a hand on Ronan's shoulder for just a second, the gesture of a woman who has seen enough of the world to recognize when something has come right, and went to get coffee. Eli got a stack of pancakes that were too large for him and ate all of them anyway with the focused determination of a child who had learned not to take food for granted and was in the process of unlearning that, slowly, meal by meal. Maeve ordered eggs. Ronan ordered nothing because he was not hungry and drank 3 cups of coffee and watched his family eat breakfast. His family. The word still had an unfamiliar texture. Not wrong. The opposite. It fit the way things fit when you have been shaped by something over time and finally set that thing in its place, and it sits there exactly as it was always going to sit, the way a stone fits a wall that was built around the space it would occupy. Eli looked up from his pancakes and caught Ronan looking at him. "What?" he said. "Nothing," Ronan said. "You were staring." "I was looking." "Same thing." "Not quite," Ronan said. Eli held his gaze for a moment with those blue eyes that were still old in places, but were getting younger, incrementally, the way things get younger when they are given time and warmth and the consistent absence of threat. There was something in them today that had not been there the first week. Not yet lightness, not quite, but the predecessor to lightness, the specific quality of a child who has started to believe, provisionally, carefully, that the ground beneath them will still be there tomorrow. He went back to his pancakes. Maeve looked at Ronan across the table. She looked at him in the specific way of 15 years, the look that contained all of them, The bad years and the better years, and the long, slow project of two people deciding to become something more deliberate than their individual damage. She reached across the table and put her hand over his. He turned his hand over. That evening, he drove alone back to Harlan Crossing, not for any purpose, not to document anything or call anyone or watch any house. He drove back because the story had started there and some part of him needed to close the geography of it, to go back to the place where a boy had said 5 words on a cold concrete pad beside a dying ice machine and set everything in motion. He parked at Pruitt's. The lot was empty. The gas station was closed, had been for 2 hours, the lights off, the sign dark. The ice machine had been replaced with a newer one, quieter. The concrete pad beside it was empty. He sat on the barrier where he'd sat for 6 consecutive afternoons and looked at the road. The Tennessee hills were dark. The stars were out. The particular density of stars that only appears when you're far enough from city light to let the sky be what it actually is. The air had the clean, cold sharpness of a November night that has committed to itself. He sat there for a while. He didn't try to arrive at anything. He just sat, the way you sit in a place that matters, letting it be a place that matters. He thought about Danny. He thought about him clearly and completely, the way he'd been trying to for 30 years and hadn't quite managed until now. Not the guilt, not the procedural replay, just his brother, 7 years old, blue eyes, a habit of collecting rocks, a laugh that had been excessive for his size, a way of following Ronan with absolute trust that had not saved him in the end because Ronan had been 17 and frightened and had not yet learned that fear was not an excuse. He was sorry. He had always been sorry. But tonight, sitting on a concrete barrier outside a closed gas station in the dark, he felt sorry in a different way. Not the sorry that curled inward and became another layer of damage, but the sorry that was simply an acknowledgement, a true thing, a weight held honestly rather than hidden. He thought about Eli, 3 hours north, asleep in a room with a dog at the foot of his bed and a hallway light on and a door open, a door that would stay open for as long as he needed it to. He thought that Danny would have liked that. He thought Danny would have liked the dog especially. He thought Danny would have liked Eli's serious, considered way of looking at the world, and the way Eli said, "That's a dumb name for a dog that big," and then named his own dog something equally inexplicable, and was completely at peace with this contradiction. He sat there until the cold became definitive. Then he started the Softail, and sat for a moment with the engine running, feeling its vibration move up through his hands and his arms and into his chest where it settled. He rode home. The hills were black on both sides of the road, and the sky was enormous above them, and the Harley's headlight made a clean tunnel through the dark, and he rode through it at the speed of someone who was not running away from anything, not toward anything in particular, just moving through the world in the way that had always made the most sense to him, engine and road and the specific freedom of a machine that went exactly where you pointed it, no more and no less. He came down out of the hills into the first spread of Knoxville's lights, and turned south, and rode through neighborhoods that were quiet at this hour, and turned again onto his street, the one with the oak tree that dropped leaves all of October, and the Alderman family's porch light that never went off, and the particular orange cast of the streetlight at the corner that he had lived beneath for 11 years. He pulled into his driveway. He killed the engine. The house was mostly dark, one light in the upstairs hall, left on out of habit. Their hall light, on until everyone was in. He sat on the bike for a moment in the driveway with the engine cooling. Then the front door opened. Eli stood in it, small in the doorway in his pajamas with lace at his knee, rubbing one eye with the back of his fist in the way of someone who has been asleep and woke up and isn't entirely certain yet why. The hall light was behind him and it framed him in gold, and he looked out at Ronan in the driveway with the drowsy, uncomplicated certainty of a child who woke up and found someone missing and went to check and found them coming home. "You were gone," Eli said. "I'm back," Ronan said. The boy looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the Softail, the same way he'd looked at it the first day, measuring it, cataloging it, the bike belonging to the man who had sat beside him in the cold and not asked him for anything. "You hungry?" Eli said. Ronan almost laughed. He controlled it. "Little bit," he said. "Maeve left stuff in the fridge," Eli said. "She said you'd come home hungry." Of course she had. Ronan swung off the bike and crossed the driveway and came up the porch steps, and the boy stepped back from the doorway to let him through, and Ronan put his hand briefly on top of Eli's head as he passed. Just a touch. A second. The weight of a hand on a child's head that said everything that mattered without requiring a single word. Eli followed him inside. Lace followed Eli. Ronan stood in his kitchen in his jacket and pulled open the refrigerator and found the plate Maeve had left, covered in foil with a note on top in her handwriting. Eat this and go to bed. You're not 20 anymore. He stood at the counter and ate without heeding it, and looked out the kitchen window at the street and the oak tree and the neighbor's eternal porch light. Behind him, he heard small feet on the kitchen floor. Then the particular rustle of a child negotiating with a dog about where the dog should sit. Then quiet. He looked over his shoulder. Eli had climbed onto one of the kitchen chairs and was sitting with his knees pulled to his chest, the old posture, the survival posture. But it was different now. It was just how he sat. It had been that for a while, something that used to mean I need to make myself small, and now just meant this is how I fit in a chair. The body's memory outlasting the necessity of it, and that too was a kind of healing, the long, slow kind that didn't announce itself. You should be asleep, Ronan said. I know, Eli said. 5 minutes, Ronan said. Eli nodded. He looked at the table, then with the careful indirection of a child who has something to say and is choosing the angle of approach. Ronan. Yeah. Is it always going to be like this? He said. I mean, he stopped. He looked for the words with the focused effort he brought to things that mattered. Like this. His hand moved, a small gesture that indicated the kitchen, the house, the night, the plate of food, and the dog and the hallway light upstairs. All of it. The whole ordinary, extraordinary fact of it. Ronan set down the fork. He turned and looked at the boy in the chair. He thought about the right answer. He thought about what honesty required here, and what comfort required, and whether those things were the same thing or different things in this specific moment for this specific child. Not always exactly like this, he said. Things change. Good days and hard days. That's real. He paused. But this? He did what Eli had done. His hand, the same small gesture, the same indication of the whole. This part. Yeah, that's permanent. Eli absorbed this. He nodded once, with the gravity of someone registering a binding agreement. Okay, he said. Okay, Ronan said. He finished eating. He rinsed the plate. He turned off the kitchen light and came to the base of the stairs, and Eli was already on them, 3 steps up, Lace behind him, heading back to bed with the slightly wobbly coordination of a child who is still more asleep than awake. Hey, Ronan said. Eli looked over his shoulder. You did good, Ronan said. Through all of it, you did better than most people could have. The boy looked at him from 3 steps up in the dark stairwell. Something moved across his face. A complicated thing, many things at once. The beginning of an accounting that would take years to complete. He didn't answer. He turned and went upstairs, and the soft particular sound of his bare feet on the floor moved down the hall, and then there was the small shift of a body getting into bed, and the rustle of a dog settling, and then quiet. Ronan stood at the bottom of the stairs. The hallway light was on. He went up. He walked past Eli's door, which was open, had been open every night since he moved in, as agreed, as needed, as permanent, and looked in. The boy was already back under the covers. Lace was a brown shape at the foot of the bed. On the shelf above the dresser, where there had been nothing for the first 3 weeks, there was now a small wooden birdhouse that Knox Hadley had driven over one Sunday without announcement and handed to Eli without ceremony, a thing he'd built in his garage because building things in his garage was how Knox processed the world, and there had been a lot to process. Eli had put it on the shelf that same afternoon and had not moved it since. Ronan looked at his son. Not by blood. Not yet by law. The paperwork still settling, the system still completing its own accounting. But in every way that a word like son actually meant anything, in the way it pointed at something real rather than just institutional, in that way, already. He pulled the door to its agreed position. Not closed, not all the way open, the specific intermediate angle that Eli had measured approximately 3 weeks ago by standing in the doorway with a look of intense concentration and then positioning the door exactly so and announcing like this and that was how it had been every night since. He went to his own room. Maeve was asleep. He undressed in the dark, moving with the practiced quiet of someone who has shared a room for 15 years and knows its geography by heart. He lay down. The house was silent, the way a house is silent when all the people in it are where they're supposed to be. He lay in the dark and thought about nothing in particular, and thought about everything. And somewhere in the middle of that, the day finished using him, and he slept. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning in late November, when the light came in flat and silver over the Knoxville rooftops, and the cold had finally committed to itself, Eli came downstairs at 7:30 to find Ronan already in the garage with the hood of the Chevelle up and the radio going low and coffee on the work table. He stood in the garage doorway in his coat and watched. "You can come in," Ronan said, not looking up from the engine. Eli came in. He looked at the car. He looked at the tools. He looked at the coffee, Ronan's, black, steaming, and then at Ronan. "Can I help?" he said. Ronan looked up from the engine. He looked at the boy standing in the cold garage in his coat, hands in his pockets, asking with the careful tentativeness of someone who still had not fully learned that asking for things wasn't dangerous. "Hand me the 3/8 socket," Ronan said. "It's the one with the—" "I know which one it is," Eli said. Because he did. He'd been watching for 3 weeks. He found it in the tray. He held it out. Ronan took it. "Now watch," Ronan said. The boy watched. Outside the open garage door, the November morning went about its business. Dots, bare trees and gray sky, and the distant, almost subliminal sound of a single motorcycle somewhere in the neighborhood, rising and fading, carrying whoever it carried toward whatever the day held. Not loud, not threatening, just present. Just the sound of someone moving through the world on their own terms, at their own speed. It faded into the distance. The garage was warm where the space heater reached. Coffee steamed on the table. The Chevelle's engine gave up what it was hiding, socket by socket, the way broken things give themselves up to hands that know how to be patient. And Eli Brooks, who had been sleeping inside every night for 3 weeks and counting, watched a man who had sat beside him in the cold and not asked him for anything show him how to take apart something that had stopped working right and put it back together better than it was before. He leaned in close to see. Ronan showed him where to look.